Order. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Environmental Audit Committee for our one-off oral evidence session today into the fashion industry and its impact on the environment. This is a follow-up to sessions that we held in the predecessor committee in the last Parliament, our inquiry with the report into fast fashion, which was a seminal inquiry. It's been the most downloaded report of any select committee ever. We achieved considerable public interest and raising awareness of this problem amongst the public at large. So our committee in this Parliament has had two short inquiries looking at what's happened since, and this is the third, and we're very pleased to have two panels of participants join us today, and I'd like to start with our first panel by thanking them for coming, and I'm just trying to find my piece of paper with everybody's names. I'm losing my eyesight, so I can't read as well as I used to be able to the names in front of us. But we've got Professor Dilys Williams. Thank you very much for joining us, Dilys. Perhaps you could just introduce yourself and your role relevant to this committee.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. I am the Director at Centre for Sustainable Fashion, University of the Arts London, and I'm also a Professor of Fashion Design for Sustainability. And I'm really glad to be able to come here and really welcome the chance to respond to the inquiry. Thank
you very much. And on your left is Femke Hartog from INretail. Could you just explain what your role is?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me here. I'm very delighted because I think it's very important that we as fashion industry, that we share our good practices and our knowledge. My name is Femke Hartog. I'm working for the Trade Association for Fashion, Furniture and Footwear Retail in the Netherlands, and we are representing all the retailers in the high streets and also SMEs. And I'm for more than 10 years active in the field of CSR and European policy affairs.
Thank you very much, and thank you for making the effort to come and join us from the Netherlands. And we're particularly pleased that Keith James has been able to join us from RAP. Keith, I think you're a late call-up as a result of illness of one of your colleagues, but welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Keith James. I'm Head of Policy and Insights at RAP, Waste and Resources Action Programme. So in my role, we've done a lot of work on textiles policy, working closely with DEFRA, but also RAP runs Textiles 2030, a public-private partnership aiming to tackle the environmental impacts of textiles, and I'm sure we'll say more about that as the session goes on.
Thank you. Dilys, could I start with you, and perhaps you could give us just a scene setter for what's happened since our original inquiry in 2019, and during, we published before this Parliament, but what's been happening during the course of this Parliament to improve, we hope, the textiles' impact on the environment?
Yes, I can. And just to say that we look at fashion from the perspective across the whole spectrum, from SMEs to big businesses. And the Fixing Fashion report gave 17 different recommendations. None of them have been taken forward, and a lot of them have been ways which they've been looked at in isolation, but not in the whole. And I think there's two sides to the story here. One is that there's some great work around looking at symptoms, and RAP is a great example of some of that. And there are some little pilot projects around looking at waste. But actually we need to think about the causes of the fashion footprint. The UK is the fourth highest emitter per person of fashion in the G20, and it's not just people with low incomes. So there's this myth that low-priced fashion is for people with low incomes. If you look at the footprint of fashion at the level across the different income sectors, it's actually the middle to high income earners, and I would encourage you to look at the Hot and Cool report for that. We've also seen a massive increase in volume of fashion. If we're talking about fashion footprint, that it relates directly to volume. And whilst we do not have figures around the total production of fashion, which we do need, and if the government was able to mandate that businesses need to say what their production volumes are, we could have this national kind of database. But what we do know that it's gone up very much. And we know that fast fashion has now become instant fashion. And I'm sure most people in the room know about Shein and how they've gone from over 5 years ago, sales of $1.5 billion. Now they're looking at $50 billion. And they've got a model that is about overstimulation of the market. So they're using a value chain that is about stimulation and looking at the apparent disposability. So this idea of not cherishing the labour or the environmental footprint. So this does not factor in the cost, the true cost. So we need to look at true cost, and we also need to look at what we've already got in the symptoms. I could go on and go through all of 17, but that kind of sets the scene of the fact we've got an imperative now that is far more clear.
The figures you just quoted, presumably that's global sales of Shein rather than UK.
Yes, but they've been encouraged by the UK government. Jeremy Hunt gave a platform, and they're about to be launched on the London Stock Exchange. So from a UK perspective, it's something that is absolutely pertinent, not only to this idea that we're actually importing waste, not just exporting it through waste colonialism to places like Ghana, but also it's undermining the UK fashion system. So we've got a lot of, UK is mainly SMEs, and the jewel in our crown is the creativity of our SMEs. Yes, I'm from University of the Arts London, so I'm going to say that because a lot of our graduates really do have that soft power that the UK has around creativity. But over 99% of our businesses are SMEs. A lot of them are very responsible. A lot of them know their supply chains, and a lot of these legislative ideas are very much geared at the mass market, which is very important. But I would also like to say that we haven't seen anything around the true value and contribution of SMEs in this country.
Did the pandemic play a significant role in increasing the use of instant clothing?
Mm-hmm. The pandemic certainly had a role in increasing plastic, the use of plastic, not only from a perspective of fashion, but also a perspective of other elements of our lives. As far as fashion production was concerned, a lot of businesses actually cancelled their orders, and a lot of the production stayed in those countries and was not paid for, and the garment workers were not paid, and that is something that is still a situation that is ongoing. And there's
purchasing from home went up.
I don't have figures on that. I can come back to you on figures on that.
Keith, do you have any data on that?
Yes, so in 2019, UK households bought about 1.5 million tonnes of textiles. As you'd expect, it went down during COVID. So in 2020, it was around 2021, it was 1.2 million tonnes. It's now back up to about 1.4 million tonnes a year. So there has been a change. We did see that during lockdown, people were keeping their clothing for longer. We haven't got any further figures yet at the moment, but for example, by 2021, people were keeping jeans for an extra year, T-shirts for an extra 9 months or so. So people were responding to the pandemic by keeping hold of clothing longer. And obviously, if we're going to reduce the environmental impact of clothing, durability is going to be a key element.
Femke, could you give us a little international context of how you see, whether you have a view about how the UK performs compared with European economies in managing the environmental footprint of the fashion sector?
Well, I think in the first place, it's important to say that it's a very international world, a world of fashion. And if you go to any high street in Europe, you see the same brand. So then you see how international the fashion retail is. And what I do believe is that in Europe, there has been a lot of regulation. Actually, the European Parliament has adopted a few bills in the last few months, and I think the CSDDD, the Eco-Design Directive, the right to repair, but also the CSRD, which is already implemented. It's all regulations which force fashion companies to report on what they are doing in terms of their footprints. So they really getting insight in their footprint, and also they have to steer on their footprint and to make the footprint lower. So I think that's just a general remark, and because those companies are so internationally active, and they're also active on the UK market, they are not keen on doing something different for another market, for a big fashion company. I understood that, for example, H&M is there in the next session, but for them it's most interesting if everything is the same in every country. So that also affects the UK. So I think that's a very positive movement. Another movement is the extended producer responsibility, which makes producers responsible for what they put on the market. And in the Netherlands, it's already legislation, which means that we have to track and trace all the garments which has been put on the market. So that in general, I think there is really a big transition going on, and for that the challenge is so big. I think it's so important that companies are working together, because it's very hard to do that on your own as a company.
Is that a Dutch requirement or an EU requirement for traceability?
Well, thank you. It's an European requirement, but it will be a European requirement in 2030. But we are a little bit together with the French trailblazer, and we already implemented it in the Netherlands.
Thank you. One of the things that we recommended in our last original report was that textiles should form part of the categories of waste that were managed and regulated by DEFRA, and our Secretary of State, the previous Secretary of State, decided that there wasn't capacity within DEFRA to introduce textile recycling regulations or textile waste regulations. What has the fashion industry been doing in the absence of a government requirement over the last 5 years to improve its performance? Dilys, is that something you could start with?
I can do. We work with large and small businesses, and I would say there's a real will for change, and we work with sustainability departments and design departments across the board with lots of different kinds of companies. But unfortunately, the license to do harm means that there's no competitive advantage to being more responsible. And the eco-design initiative and legislation around that, which is going through the EU, is something that is of great interest to a lot of fashion companies, because fashion companies have designers, product developers and purchasers. All of them are thinking about this. But at the moment, they do not have any incentive to behave that way, and the system is geared up that actually there's no infrastructure for them to behave in that way. We're seeing amazing models new models of resale and repair and rental, but at the moment it's this two-way story. They're completely outsized by this increase in volume of things that are almost waste as they come in. So all of the good initiatives are completely outweighed by the fact that there's a race to the bottom, and those businesses are now in competition with these instant fashion companies. So the goodwill is not able to actually be taken forward.
And consumer behaviour isn't sufficiently strong. The consumer demand pull to change behaviour is overtaken by price, effectively.
Yes, I mean, there's a bit of a values action gap. We can see, and during the pandemic and after the pandemic, there's findings to say, and also because of the cost of living crisis, that people are really interested in sustainability. They do care. The awareness is really high. However, what's actually happening is because of the overstimulation, people are still kind of the newness, the excitement of newness, which is actually a social and cultural thing as well as a technical thing.
I don't want to eat too much of my colleagues' next set of questions on price. But Keith, could you just, my last question for you before we move on to Jerome Mayhew is whether you've seen a greater sense of responsibility amongst producers and retailers to dispose of the waste end of the value chain, when stock being unable to be sold, what happens to it? Are they getting better at recycling and reusing?
Yes, so in terms of RAP's activities, we run Textiles 2030 voluntary agreements. So we've got 60% of the market participating in that, and they've signed up to collective targets to cut carbon and water. And then they've signed up to actions to drive circularity as well, so thinking about design, stock, recyclability. SCAP was our previous voluntary agreement. That was Sustainable Clothing Action Plan. That ran from 2012 to 2020. that had 45% of the market. So we've got more of the market engaged in this issue now, willing to take part in trials and pilots. But there is still a lot more to do, and we're only going to hit those targets if we do something that reduces levels of consumption.
Thank you. Jerome Mayhew.
Thank you very much, Chair. Dilys, just before I go on to the other question, you use this phrase overstimulated market or overstimulation. It's not a phrase I'm familiar with. Can you just explain what you mean? How do you define that phrase?
Okay, thank you. So the mainly digital, but also in stores, the turnaround now of stock is very quick. So we've gone from having a collection that would be in a store for a few months to a collection being in the store for a few days even sometimes. And online customers are given this push model of come and get this new thing. And some of the new businesses, I think it's Temu, offers you a discount. All of their items are under £10. So there's this idea that it's actually low risk because you're not spending very much money. And people are encouraged to buy a lot of things. And quite often, if they don't want them, the company will say, don't bother sending it back. Because it actually costs them more to take it back. So this overstimulation is that the constant idea of newness and being offered something and on your phone, just being told you've got 10 hours or 2 hours.
I mean, marketing is stimulating demand. That's its raison d'etre. That's not new. But I'm just interested in what's new about this. It's just the time frame, is it?
It's the time frame and the volume. And the volume of purchases and the amount of purchases that people aren't wearing and just throwing away, buying and not even wearing. And we know also that actually over a certain amount of consumption, it's not good from a labour perspective of what people are being paid, from an environmental perspective, but also from a mental health perspective. And actually, if you've got too much...
All of those are an inevitable consequence of fast fashion, but they happen to be in the way that their business models are
The
currently.
environmental impact is and so is the social, the underpaying of labour and the use of slave labour is part of the model. The model only works on exploitation and extraction. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to sell things for that price.
Femke, consumer behaviour. Over the last 5 years, what trends are we seeing? Are we buying more? Are we retracting into better quality, buy good, buy once? Terrible English, but you know what I mean. What have you seen in the data?
Well, thank you for this question, because I think there's not one consumer. You got different kind of consumer groups, and you see also that they are behaving in a different way. So there's a group of consumers who's very responsible and very demanding in terms of transparency. But there's also a really large group who likes to buy on price, and I think that's still the largest group. And the development which was depicted about companies like Shein and Temu, it's for consumers, and especially young consumers, very interesting. So that's a new way of consuming. That's definitely a trend.
We've had a high inflation since Russia invaded Ukraine. It's led to cost of living pressures, which we're all very familiar with. I would have thought that where money is more scarce, that would lead to a change in consumer behaviour, where you go for durability, something you're about clothing as opposed to wear it, don't bother washing it, throw it away. And there's some support from Intel that I've read about, where they say that there has been a move towards better quality, more durable clothing. Have you noticed that in the data?
Yeah, that's for a certain group. Definitely, there is a demand for more quality, sustainability, transparency, and so on, for sure. But I think that has more to do with the global developments and the global warming and so on. And but I think on the other side, you see that also because of the inflation, that the consumer likes to buy more for less. So more for a lower. The consumer likes to buy more for a lower price.
An instant fast fashion, given that you wear it once or twice, it's not actually very good value for money, is it? If you're just looking at even as a consumer, you're paying, it may be less than £10 you're paying.
Yeah.
You're buying it again and again and again.
Yeah. It's a false economy.
Yeah, and I'm...
Sorry, just beyond that, you're right. I mean, it's very interesting you say it's a false economy. Whose job is it to promulgate that, to influence a typically younger, often female cohort that is perhaps drawn in by a sub-£10 buy it and move on? That's value for money. Is it the government's job? Is it the sector's job? Is it Textile 2030? Whose job is it?
I think it's everybody's job, and as Femke said, I think there are the two stories, because there are some really, over 64% of customers saying they really care about sustainability, particularly in the younger end of the market, at the same time as that being the market that's buying a lot more.
So interesting is we're told that it's that the youth are our future and they're really interested in the environment and climate change, and yet you're also telling us it's that demographic that is causing this problem, because they're the consumer, they're creating the demand.
I think that's where there's an amazing opportunity for policy, because policy isn't just about accountability of numbers and waste, etc., and the sort of infrastructure. It's also about a cultural shift, because actually if it becomes more socially acceptable to be buying second-hand, wearing second-hand, and what we're saying as a country about what we are promoting and so if Shein is being promoted, then that seems to be something that's aspirational.
At the same time, I've got 3 children, so I'm in the thick of this.
Yeah.
My fashion changes as often as my hairstyle at the moment, I'm afraid. But the what they say is
you've got a good hairdresser
vintage
here.
And Depop. My children are they are recycling their clothes in a way I never did, and that seems to be very much part of the course for their generation. So where's is it that we have two communities, one buying and throwing away, and the other one?
Absolutely. So we need to be able to support and incentivise the resale models, and to be able to disincentivise the big ones. So it's kind of an X curve. We need to really be able to rise up, and also thinking about localised fashion and looking at this country in different parts of this country and different communities where there are makers and resellers. So it's also a distributed model, but at the same time we need to be able to retire out a broken model. So it's a two-way approach.
If I know you want to come in on this.
So the people who buy clothing most frequently are people who like socialising. They want to look up to date. Actually, they don't want an overflowing wardrobe. They want access to clothes. And that group of society are the most interested in alternate business models. So you mentioned Vinted and Depop, eBay as well. So people like selling and buying. They want to extend the life of the clothing, but they want to look up to date. So they want to change frequently. So rental, repair, reuse are all business models that these people are interested in. So when I mentioned earlier about cutting consumption, actually it's selling differently.
And if you look at the business models of those companies, they are seeing very significant growth, aren't they?
Yes.
So it is working, it's just perhaps not working.
Yeah, but the overall volume is bigger, so it's 10% of what's actually bigger.
Brings me nicely, Keith, on to what you've been up to with Textiles 2030. If you can just update the committee to begin with on where you've got to with Textiles 2030.
Yes, certainly. So we've got a target to halve greenhouse gas emissions associated with UK fashion by 2030, cut water use by a third, and then the circularity actions that I spoke about. Our latest update is from 2023 against the 2019 baseline. So carbon emissions have gone down by 2%, but water use has gone up by 8% over that 4-year period. So there's some real challenges, and that's why the business models are so important.
It's very disappointing numbers, I think we'd all agree, because Textile 2030 took on from SCAP 2020, I think it was called, wasn't it? And that was from 2012 to 2020, and that actually outperformed its targets. The carbon footprint was meant to reduce by 15%, it went by 21.6%. Water reduction by 15% actually reduced by 18%, and waste footprint from 13.5% reduction to 2.1%, so it didn't do as well on that one. And then it seems that from 2019, the rate of improvement has absolutely gone into reverse, and in some issues, particularly water use, you've literally gone into reverse. What's your explanation for that, and how are you going to turn it around between now and 2030?
So obviously there have been changes in the mix of fibres that people are using. So if you think about cotton and polyester, they've got very different carbon and water profiles. So it's about the type of clothing that is being sold, but the proportion of the market that is represented by Textiles 2030 is higher than SCAP as well. So we've got new companies we're working with who are trying to tackle issues. So we're tackling a bigger share of the problem. So those companies are committed to doing more and working with us to tackle those. But yes, you're right, there are challenges.
What's worse for the environment? The very heavy use of water in cotton manufacture or microfibres coming from polyester?
Yes, two very different issues that we both need
They're
to
both
take out
bad.
of.
We've got to wear something.
Yes.
We've got to wear something, and there's a lot of amazing clothes that are already in existence. Plus, there are a lot of clothes that we can make in the UK. Plus, there are inevitably we want to be able to bring things in from different places. It's just about having a better eco-design system, so that we're making better choices about the materials we're using, about how things are worn, how they can extend their first life.
That's my final question for
Yes.
you. Okay, very quick one. Is fine and well. We want to extend the use of the stuff that's already been produced. We want to buy new stuff and have it for longer. But it's got to be made of something. And I struggle at the moment where if you've got natural fibres, which are very heavy use of water, or you've got man-made fibres with all the plastic-related issues that comes into our water and into our food system. Yeah, we've got to make a choice somewhere. And should we actually be transitioning, saying we recognise that we're going to use more water, but we should be moving more heavily towards towards natural fibres?
Sorry, I know I keep answering them. The water is different in different parts of the world. So if you're drawing water from a place that's got water scarcity and you're taking away from a local community, it's very different from where if you're growing hemp in Lancashire, where there's plenty of water. So it's not as straightforward as is it a problem with water? Is it a problem with polyester? Yes, we absolutely have to phase out of fossil fuels, and we do need to look at ways in which we can go beyond fossil fuel fabrics. But when it comes to looking at cotton, when it comes to wool, for example, in this country, there are different things that are appropriate not only to place but also to the kind of garment. So I think that goes back to design. If you design something where you're using a material that's appropriate to that use, then if you're designing a sportswear piece, then it's going to use very different fabric than if you're designing a dress for
Sure,
night.
we'll come back to this.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious that the Minister is on his feet, but I think Barry Gardner will now give us an exemplary demonstration of how you can get
famous for brevity.
your questions in the next 7 minutes.
Look, in 2018, the government promised to look at extended producer responsibility for textiles. Will that be being brought in the revision to the Waste Directive that's due next year?
You want to talk about that?
Yes, in Europe, yes. So there is a strong push now for mandatory EPR across Europe. Netherlands and France obviously going ahead, but Hungary has already also gone ahead.
Yes, but I'm more concerned about what's going to happen in the UK, because
Yeah.
the government did promise that it would look at this for the UK
Yes.
by next year. So is it going to happen here?
I can't comment on whether it's going to happen, but what I can say is we've done the research with industry to design an EPR scheme and look at the costs and benefits, and that's published on RAP's website. And what we identified with industry is EPR is essential, but you also need some other policies to underpin it to make sure the system does change.
Tell us what those other policies are and how we would incorporate them in the recommendations that this committee will make in its report.
Yeah, so there's 4 complementary policies alongside EPR. So a ban on landfill or incineration of unsorted textile waste. There's also a need for investment in infrastructure. So in the UK, we can't cope with the amount of textile waste we have. So investment in collection, sorting and reprocessing infrastructure. That could be alongside or part of an EPR scheme.
Now, in other countries, they put a 1 penny per garment tax on, but in France they found that actually I think the recommendation was that wasn't sufficient, and they recommended that it should be perhaps 5p or 10p per garment. Now that would raise, if it were 5p, £175 million a year for the recycling and channeling of the waste from textiles. Is that something that you would wish us to be recommending in our report?
Yes, so that's something we've recommended as well. So we looked at a 10p per garment fee, and unsurprisingly came up with a figure roughly double what you just suggested. But yes, absolutely, we think that EPR is essential.
And there's no indication that a small garment tax of 5p or 10p that was hypothecated to the end-of-life treatment of the garment would in any way put somebody off from purchasing that garment in the first place?
We don't have any evidence to suggest that.
Thank you.
Can I just say that we have seen, anecdotally from speaking to businesses, that businesses are starting to say they'd put aside that money just to be able to carry on doing what they're doing. So the idea of EPR is to actually change behaviour, and I think we need a raft of other kinds of levels of legislation. And if you look at what's happening in France with actually incentivising repair and giving money for repair, that is a really good opportunity to look at how the sort of ecosystem of keeping something in the system at its better stage can help. Skills and education around being able to sew and be able to repair garments in schools, in local communities. There's a kind of sort of a lot of layers that we could actually put into place that would actually take us beyond what the EU is doing. But all of the EU and the France's fast fashion tax bill as well is really important to that.
Very good. And tell me this, you mentioned earlier the way in which this whole model is predicated on modern slavery. How do we tackle that?
How long have you got?
Minutes, according to the chair.
We have to make the Modern Slavery Act more accountable to begin with, and I know Philip's done a lot of work on that, not just with fashion. We need to be able to make support the businesses that are trying to change, because I think rather than moving out of a business or moving out of a factory, we've got to find ways in which to be able to support a change in labour practices, trade union strength, etc.
Mr. Hartog, tell us what's happening in the European Union. You outlined very fully what's happening in the Netherlands, but what are the other good practices that we could be adopting?
Well, I think the regulation about CSRD and the CSDDD, which is coming, that's the due diligence. Yes.
There are people watching who will have no idea what those acronyms are.
I'm sorry. But I think I like to mention the Corporate Social Due Diligence Directive, because that forces companies to report on their due diligence, and it gives insight in the risks. And you were asking about modern slavery, and I think that's very special to mention this.
I understand there will be further questions relating to that later on.
Well,
so perhaps
okay. Because I think if you look into the risks of a company, you are not only looking to the environmental risk, but you're also looking to the social risks. And I truly believe that they are intertwined, and I think that's a very good start. And I think this legislation, and we saw it in Germany because they already have legislation on due diligence. We see that companies who are not German companies but who are active on the German market, they are reporting very well. And if you know the facts and figures, you also know where you have to set things in motion to work on those risks.
So you would say that actually there is evidence that something like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures or the International Sustainability Standards Board, they are having an impact in your view?
What I see for companies, yes, they have. Yeah.
Very good. What are the other, and this is open to anyone, what are the other mandatory measures? Could be regulation, could be financial incentives, that you think would be most effective in reducing the UK fashion industry's environmental footprint?
Eco-design criteria, durability standards. I mentioned...
I thought this committee recommended those the last time you did the report. Yeah. So what happened?
Nothing.
It was a genuine question.
No.
They've relied on voluntary industry collaboration, and that isn't enough. I mean, there's great, what Textiles 2030 is doing is fantastic. What the UNCCC, United Nations CCC Climate Charter is doing is fantastic, but it's not enough because it's voluntary, it's a few people, and they do...
We need mandatory schemes, and if we're talking about eco-design, there should be some form of fiscal incentive, are you saying, for those companies who incorporate perhaps greater recycled material in their textiles, or that they make them in such a way that they are easier to, they're longer lasting or easier to dispose of?
We need also to have a cap on volumes in some way, yes, or a tax on volumes, and we also need to think about appropriate use and appropriate stimulation, because this overstimulation culture is driving...
How do we do that? I'm really interested in how you think we can stop that overstimulation.
The CMA work is fantastic, that's just come out, that's looking at what the green claims of businesses are, and that can be taken a lot further.
How do we make it not cool? I mean, you're in the business of cool, you're in the business of fashion, that's what you're a professor of. Yeah. So how do we actually get it out there that actually you just look a complete nana because you're destroying the planet?
At the moment, there are some amazing media pieces, and there are a great number of people, and we see it in our students, that are really thinking, as Femke said, about an alternative way to think about fashion. But at the moment, the overstimulation model, because it's something that we all tap into, whether it's we're buying phones or whether we're buying fashion, it's driving us to think it's this really low risk and it's fine, it's okay. And those green claims that are being made, that it is eco, those things all need to be taken away.
Because there are actions that government could take that would stop that.
By enforcing the green claims. But I mean, the French government actually did an anti-Black Friday campaign. So actually deciding that as a government, we want to create a different kind of social understanding of value, of cherishing what we've got. So I think, whether you take cigarettes or whether you take previous years of how governments can actually create campaigns, but also support the campaigns that media are doing, support education, the arts education, because actually our creatives come through that channel. And at the moment, there's a real disincentive to take an arts degree. And we know that. I know that's a slightly different conversation here, but I think it's really important because, as Femke said, the interdependencies between social issues, cultural issues, environmental issues, and economic issues, where we are, the well-being economy, and look at the EU well-being economy ideas. That's also where we can go.
James?
Effective product labelling. So we know a third of consumers are really open to labelling, and they want to know about standards. They want to know about durability, in particular, at the point they're buying something. But that needs to be underpinned by a legal framework. They need to trust that label. So again, it wouldn't be enough to have a voluntary eco-label. It's got to have a mandatory footing.
Mr. Hartog.
Yeah, well, we in the Netherlands, as a sector, we try to do consumer campaigns also about how you can wear things long-lasting, etc. And we are only at the beginning of that. But we said, as trade association, we have to make a change. So we are also looking to the consumer and also looking as an industry how we come across that consumers, because our retailers, they are very good in coming to that consumer. So I think there's a beginning, but I think they are a very important actor in this. And secondly, but I'm a little afraid for the green claims discussion, because I think that it's important that a green claim is no nonsense, that it's true. But on the other side, what I see is that companies are really reluctant in communicating, because they are so afraid of being accused of green claiming. And I think as an industry, we have to be straight. I mean, we have challenges in our industry, but we have to be straight on those challenges. And only if we are open and straight about these challenges, we can look for a solution. But being accused all the time of green claims makes it really difficult for companies to be open and frank. So that's a little bit the other part of it.
Well, we've beaten the bell, so thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Barry. Chris Crayling.
So the committee's heard a lot in the past about the issue of recycling, the fact that not enough is being recycled, there's not enough resources and facilities and technologies to deliver the level of recycling that's needed. What progress has been made and is being made?
You want to
Yes, so there is progress, but I think it's fair to say the UK is behind Asia and Europe on this issue. So there are lots of small-scale recycling facilities. They tend to be running at a pilot level. They might be tackling a few fabrics like wool. There's a lot of mechanical recycling, but what's needed really is a step change for chemical recycling. And to make that viable, they have to produce the amount of product that buyers want to buy. So from day one, your plant needs to produce 50,000 tonnes a year as a minimum, because it's got to match up with what the market wants to buy. So I'm sure the committee are familiar with the demise of Renewcell, which had a lot of funding, had a lot of issues, but one of those issues was about its ability to meet demand. So there's a lot of support that's required to actually make sure the businesses can start, but start at quite a high level.
What are those involved in recycling actually trying to recycle the fibres into?
So back into fibres that are suitable for use in clothing.
Is that potentially part of the problem? So, for example, with a number of synthetic fuels, we're now moving to a situation where waste can be used and recycled to create fuels, particularly where there's natural fibres involved. You know, there's not enough feedstocks available for the potential recycling. Are we looking in the wrong places for the ability to recycle fibres?
Well, the technology works already, so you can recycle natural fibres into lyocell and other fibres that you can use. You can recycle the synthetic fibres back into synthetic fibres again. So the technology works, but it's just not working at scale. I used to run RAP's textiles programme, and when we looked at the advanced recycling market, it was 3 to 6 years away from commercialisation. I suspect today it's about 3 to 6 years away from commercialisation without an intervention. It's
purely, you know, is the industry looking at recycling purely from the point of view of, you know, the assumption of members of the public is that you just recycle fibres into more fibres for more clothing. Is there enough lateral thinking?
In terms of the markets...
in terms of what you can actually recycle en masse?
Yes, so the challenge obviously is that there is a long history of mechanical recycling, but it's quite low margins, and there's a challenge in terms of product quality. So the industry is looking at how you can make high quality, high value products. So they are looking for new markets. So it is genuinely novel to try and chemically recycle the fibres back into fibre. You're breaking it down into constituent parts, so you could break it down into commodity chemicals as well. And again, it's finding the markets for that.
So we will see black bin bag waste recycled as synthetic fuels in the future. It just seems to me that this is a route to solve some of the problems the industry faces, and that doesn't get you away from the issues of slave labour and so forth. But it does help if you've got piles of stuff that's just being dumped on the roadside in developing countries, because there's nothing you can do with it.
Yeah, so the challenge is obviously to make a high value product, but also to tackle the supply. So all the challenges associated with the clothing sector from an environmental point of view are to do with the amount of consumption in the raw materials we're using. So we've got to change the way we use raw materials, and we can change that through business models, and we can do that by changing the feedstock. So we absolutely have to have a recycling model that works alongside the reuse, rental, repair models.
And Professor Williams, in your written evidence, you warned that improvements in repair and resale could inadvertently lead to overconsumption. What did you mean by that?
If we're looking at the waste hierarchy, as Keith was just saying, the complexity of often mixed fibres and the labour that's gone into a garment, the last thing we should be doing really is actually breaking it down. If we can find ways to be able to extend the value at its first life, and you know, it's easier when you look at the models in luxury. So people like we work with Burberry, and there's a lot of UK companies that, whether it's shoe companies that will take back and repair the shoes, and you're buying a shoe for life. You're buying the use of a shoe. You're not buying just the product. But if we can do that all along the way, then actually we've got far greater opportunity to extend the value, because breaking something down, there's inevitably an energy issue there as well. So this idea of something being recycled, being benign, is also something we've got to be careful of. Yes, there will be a certain amount that you really can't rewear, but it's about keeping as high up the hierarchy as we can to keep things in their current form or to repair them, and I gave the example in France that actually they've incentivised repair, and I think they're giving €15 for somebody to take something back to be repaired, because actually a lot of the durability issues, it's the social durability. It's not seen as something you want to wear anymore. It's not that the fibre itself is falling apart. So I think this idea about durability isn't just about the functionality, it's about the social currency.
We've also heard in the past more research needed into microfiber shredding. Progress on that?
If you want to do it. So in France, they are about to pass a bill. You probably know more about it than I do, to make sure that washing machines can capture the microfibers. Obviously, that doesn't completely solve it. We haven't got that yet in the UK. That would potentially be quite a straightforward best practice for us to look at. It is a huge issue. I'm not somebody that knows about the details. I can draw on the details of that, but that's a sort of starting point of something that is happening.
Mr. Hartog, are you able to enlighten us a bit more about what's happening on the continent?
What's happening on the continent? Well, because I think the ultimate goal is a circular economy. And your first question about what's the idea that the raw materials, that's how I interpret your questions, are raw materials, are raw materials being replaced by recycled fibers. I think if we are there, that would be great. I mean, in the end, that's the ultimate goal. And another goal is also to have more durability of clothing. So I think they are going together, and if you see, for example, in the EPR, that the EPR now is not only about recycling, but it's also about reuse, and it's also about recycling, not only recycling as such, but also fiber-to-fiber recycling. So there's a lot of there's a big drive on that, and I think in all the member states, everyone is very interested in this development. Yeah.
Keith, when do you expect there to be a formal target for microfiber shredding? Are we going to get Textiles 2030 to be in a position to do that?
As Textiles 2030, we're not currently looking at microfiber shedding. So we're looking at the issues that we felt we could control and influence. Microfibers wasn't one of those, unfortunately, so we recognise it's an important issue, but we focused on carbon, water and circularity.
And how concerned should we be that the CMA is investigating the sector for greenwashing?
So I think that goes back to one of the points that Femke raised, this concern about being able to say anything about green issues. So the opposite is green shushing, where people aren't prepared to talk about the work they're doing for fear of criticism. So I think it's right and proper that CMA do investigate claims, but we should be encouraging companies to talk about what they are doing.
And lastly, the government told the predecessor committee of this committee that it was developing options for a domestic eco-label scheme. Are you aware of anything taking place that you've come into contact with on that, any of you?
So we've done some research for DEFRA that's published on our website, looking at various elements of eco-labelling. So we were looking at eco-labelling for durability, recyclability and repairability, and how you could best communicate that. So I'm afraid I'm not aware of next steps to take that forward, but we have done the work to understand what an eco-label could look like and how it could work.
Yeah, I would be very careful with domestic labeling, because I think it's very burdensome for companies. And of course there is labeling, but I think the Eco-Design Directive, where you set a benchmark for the full industry, I think that would be very interesting, instead of developing all kind of different labels, because that would be very confusing. It would be very confusing for the consumer in first instance, but it's also very burdensome. And I think it would be better if the investment is going to the transition instead of the communication about domestic labeling.
Thank you, Chris. Anna McMorran.
Thank you. I want to turn to working practices, and in the inquiry that this committee did in the previous Parliament on fast fashion, it found that people were exploited, as well as the environmental degradation and abuses. So I want to ask, there were several recommendations made at that time, including the fact that retailers should sign up to global framework agreements, explicit reference to modern slavery in the Companies Act, many recommendations. Can I ask, firstly, Professor Williams, can I ask you, in the last 5 years then, what have you seen change within this industry on this matter?
Yeah, and the report in 2018 did create an amazing awareness, certainly in this country and you know, in Leicester, and I think you know probably what's happened in that situation. But I think what we're seeing is, again, it's this two-picture thing. We work with a lot of small businesses in the UK, and they are finding that it's quite difficult for them to be able to prove their labour practices, but at the same time, because they're small chains and small networks, we have got great examples of very good practice when it comes to labour and the London living wage for businesses based in London in this area. But we're seeing that there's even more of a proliferation of imports, as we've just talked about, coming from China, where everything is outsourced and outsourced and outsourced. So there's really very little accountability for the subcontracting of subcontracting. So we're still in a position where we actually don't know the numbers, and there's some amazing initiatives that are looking at labour rights, and Labour Behind the Label, for example, are in a very important lobbying group that are looking very specifically at labour in the fashion sector. And you'll see from all of their reports, we're still at the position where people haven't been paid for garments that were cancelled during the pandemic. We're still seeing that people are working under modern slavery conditions, and so we are not yet at a position where things in this country and overseas. So we need to be able to take forward the Modern Slavery Act to make it more accountable and more visible.
Okay, so you know we've heard, and we're going to be hearing in the next panel session, we're going to be hearing from a representative from boohoo, but boohoo have come under some considerable a spotlight, not least from a documentary as well, but we also called them out in our inquiry, particularly not signing up to ethical trade initiatives, not being unionised, paying off suppliers, as you've just mentioned, all of these things. So, and also not being aware of that supply chain issues and not actually being accountable for what's happening overseas. That's boohoo. We have asked them, they and obviously they deny as well, and they'll have a chance later on to come back on this, but they have contradicted some of the challenges put to them on the BBC documentary about when that was looked inside. However, would you, so they'll have a chance, but would you call out any other companies who are still practicing unethically in terms of working practices, what they're doing and what can be improved? Have they improved at all, or where can we start with our recommendations on this?
I think it is a systemic problem, so I wouldn't call out one company over another, because it goes back to the thing of, you know, we see everything else in our lives has gone up in price over the last 15 years, and fashion's gone down. So that, you know, there's only...
You wouldn't call out, you know, any of the bigger...
I wouldn't call out one company.
Not one company, but several.
As a group of companies, I think that the power is held, and you only need to look at the profits of those companies and the income gap between the owners and the lowest paid to know that that is a model that is completely unethical. But it's a model that's unethical, and those businesses at the moment don't necessarily have an incentive other than their moral incentive to do differently.
But we've asked them to do things like unionise, and they've not done that. So pay fairly.
All of those things of being able to have workers' rights, health and safety, and minimum wage. Those things are the things should be a basic of living in the UK and working in the UK. And you know, the fashion sector employs millions of people around the world. It should be fulfilling jobs.
What about that company that had the reports of, I think it was Shine, that had reports of "Help Me" written in the label from perhaps workers overseas as a cry for help? Would you comment on that?
Yes, so we should not be importing goods when we know that they've been made through modern slavery. So, they should be stopped before they reach our shores, and people in this country are buying them and wearing them. So, yeah, we have a responsibility.
Okay, to put pressure. Okay, Ms. Den Hartog, can I ask you about comparisons then across Europe and in your experience on how poor working conditions are being addressed?
Yeah, I'm happy you asked at Labor Day. So, well, I think just to start, in the Netherlands, there's an initiative, the Agreement on Sustainable Textiles, which was from 2016 to 2020, and we will follow this up with a new initiative, and that was about a multi-stakeholder dialogue with unions, NGOs, and 60% of the Dutch businesses, and they were obliged to do due diligence and on environmental issues, but also on the social issues. So they were involved in projects about collective agreements, collective bargaining, living wage, and so on. And I mentioned it before, but to do your due diligence is so essential, because I think the risk of slavery in the value chain is there, but you must always be aware of that risk, and you have to mitigate those risks, and you have to be active on those risks. So I think in the Netherlands we try to bring companies on voluntary basis in these kind of projects, which was very successful. And now we get legislation, the due diligence directive, and I think the industry, if I talk to European fashion brands, they are happy with the due diligence directive, because they say it's so important that the entire industry is going to implement a due diligence, because we have to report on very severe risks like modern slavery. And I think also you need each other in the production countries, because if you talking, for example, about collective bargaining in a country like Turkey or Bangladesh, then you have a very local situation, and you have to cope with that local situation, and that goes for better if you are doing that with NGOs, unions, and a lot of companies. So,
would you then recommend that as one of our recommendations to government, to introduce a due diligence piece of legislation?
Yeah,
I mean, due diligence was one of the recommendations that was made by us in 2018. I was on that committee back then, and but the government didn't introduce that.
Yes, I would recommend for two reasons, because I think a due diligence is... the fashion industry is very familiar with due diligence, because we've got a special OECD framework, and I don't know the acronym OECD, the Organization for Economic Development. They have a special framework for the fashion and footwear sector, so companies are doing that due diligence already, and now there is the European legislation, and actually the European legislation is less strict than the OECD framework, but I think a due diligence obligation also in the UK would be very interesting for the industry, because it's also good for the level playing field, because it's a very international international industry.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Are there any other recommendations you'd make for us in terms of this report moving forward towards government?
Well, I think for the Netherlands, I'm very proud of our multi-stakeholder dialogue we have with unions, NGOs and businesses. And companies were very happy that now it's another case, but in the beginning, our government was also facilitating this. And that brought us together. And I can remember a moment in 2015, I was in Bangladesh with our minister, with Dutch unions and the Clean Clothes campaign and companies, and that was such a good visit because we all understood that we have the same goal, and that is to make the fashion industry better.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. I think we've got a final, very quick question from Claudia Webb.
Just a very quick follow-on question. Claudia Webb, what exactly do you think it is that is allowing British brands and retailers to get away for so long with poor working practices in their supply chains, both here and abroad?
Because there isn't really a transparency around that. So it's been normalised. It's been normalised that prices of fashion have gone down. In fact, prices of other things have gone up. So people have othered it and just think that it's happening elsewhere or think that it's not affecting them. And even though in the time that I've been working in this area, which is quite a long time, Gap and Nike were called out many years ago around their labour practices, and it's become normalised. It's almost become that the people have just ignored it or thought that government should be doing something about it, and government should be doing something about it in this country. So for some reason it has become normalised.
Thank you. I'm afraid we're going to have to bring it to a conclusion. So I'd like to thank our panellists, Femke and Hartog. Thank you particularly for coming all this way, for Professor Dilys Williams and Keith James for standing in at short notice. Thank you very much. That concludes our first panel. The good news is we will not be having a vote, so we can move straight into the second panel. Grateful if we could just suspend the session for a moment. Order. Thank you.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
5-4. Order. Welcome back to the second panel in our evidence session today on the fashion sector. And I'd like to start by welcoming our witnesses. But before I do, I'd just like to point out this is a panel primarily for participants in the online and bricks and mortar retail session for new product and for reuse product. We have, as a committee, invited a great many retailers, household names, to attend in person to give evidence today. And I have to confess to being disappointed that 15 companies chose not to come today, and I'm going to identify them because they all had their own reasons. But as a way of thanking those of you who have had the courage to come and sit before this committee today, I'm afraid that Matalan, TK Maxx, ASOS, I Saw It First, Shine, Asda, John Lewis, M&S, New Look, Next, Sainsbury's and Tesco all were unable to be represented today. They encouraged us to talk to the British Retail Consortium. We had spoken to them previously in this Parliament, but I would like to put it on the record that I think that's a pretty poor performance, that they're not prepared to stand up to their own corporate responsibilities. And by contrast, I'm pleased to welcome Andrew Reaney from Boohoo, who has been, I think, appeared before at our committee when you've just been appointed to Boohoo. Boohoo have been subject to substantial criticism by this committee and others, so I'm pleased that you've had the courage to join us today, Andrew, and I'm aware that you may not be with Boohoo for much longer, so that's also something you may or not wish to go into as your reasons for your departure. So welcome to Andrew, welcome to Lorna Fallon from Oxfam, one of the larger resellers of used clothing in the country, to Marcus Hartmann from H&M, who's joined us today from Sweden. So I'm very grateful to you for taking the trouble to come and visit us to Parliament today, and to Joe Metcalfe, the CEO of Thrift Plus. I'm not going to ask you what you will do, because I think you'll be able to explain that during the course of your evidence. I'm going to start with you, Andrew. Boohoo has made to this committee a large number of pledges about how it would improve its environmental performance. Could you tell us how that is going and what has changed in the period since you last appeared before the committee?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Just for the record, just for the committee's record, I am indeed leaving my position at Boohoo. I am currently working my notice period. Rest assured, the 4 years that we've done here in Boohoo have been challenging, but we put very good processes in place. We've been very open and transparent with the committee and others, and we will continue to do that. And no doubt the team, the person that succeeds me, will build on the work that we've done to date. In the context of the sustainability strategy and journey we're on, it's probably worth saying, in some of the topics that were discussed at the first panel, hopefully we'll get to revisit, because we, I suppose, on the retail side would have similar views, but also perhaps can inform the committee of some of our own findings. If I was to start maybe with one or two indications of consumer behaviour, because that was referenced a couple of times, and then perhaps I can talk about our sustainability strategy. And I'm happy for this to be read into the record. Our stats would tell us that our customer, over the course of the last 5 years, on average, purchases 2.5 times per year from us, and he or she, mainly she, purchases 3.5 items of clothing, and the average purchase over the course of the year is just less than £200, and that's been constant over the course of the last 5 years. What has absolutely changed, and obviously it's probably the main topic of conversation here, is the expectation for the consumer in terms of ways to interact with us. So obviously, and happy to say that actually we partner with Joe on Thrift Plus as an example. We have a marketplace of our own. So consumers' expectations today is, yes, they can buy from our brands, and we operate brands like PLT, Karen Millen, Debenhams, for instance, household names. But we also have, for instance, a marketplace. So about 2 years ago, we launched a marketplace for consumers to resell. Within the first 4 weeks, we had 450,000 downloads. So 450,000 individual consumers downloaded the app to give them the ability to resell. And that's really probably the single biggest change. Consumers want options to resell, they want options to rent. We have a partnership with British Heart Foundation. I'm sure the operation model is similar to Lorna's Oxfam. So that's probably the single biggest change. Consumers are interacting with us in multiple different ways.
Thank you. You mentioned resellers. I should have mentioned that we also invited resellers to turn up, and Depop, eBay and Vinted all declined to come today. Mr. Hartmann, could you give us a sense, we haven't heard from H&M before at this committee, about the role that environmental sustainability plays in how you treat your products and your customers?
Yes, sir. And firstly, I wish to express my gratitude for the invitation, and we are more than happy to come to these events and these hearings to give our view. Transparency is an important part of our sustainability work, to showcase how we do it and how we want to be leading the change towards a more sustainable and circular fashion industry. We have a long-standing commitment to offer our customers the best combination of fashion, quality, price and sustainability. We have worked with this for a long time. We have been reporting on sustainability for almost over 20 years as of this year. and we see that this is, again, a very important part of our offering to our customers. When it comes to our environmental footprint, we are a global operations. We operate in almost 80 markets across the world. Our main impact is in our supply chain when it comes to material choices and the production of our garments. We do not own any production, but we work together with our suppliers to decrease this. So, and in this, we have very tough targets for ourselves when it comes to decreasing our emissions. We want to halve our emissions by 2030 and be net zero by 2040. These targets are in line with the Science Based Target Initiative and have been approved by them, and we are progressing towards them. Part of this we've been hearing on the first panel about materials and materials recycling. We have a very, very strong goal when it comes to materials as well. We want 100% of our materials to be more sustainably sourced or recycled by 2040 as well. And by 2030, 50% is to be recycled. So this is a very, very strong target and a strong commitment from our side.
It's recycled after use?
Yes.
And how do you go about doing that? Are you providing facilities for collection in store?
Yes, we have a take-back schemes worldwide in our store. It started in 2013, so we have long experience with this, where we accept garments and textiles from anyone, not only H&M, but from anyone. We collect this and we sort it, and we see what can be reused. Last year, about 68% went to reuse as garments. If a jacket, it kept on being a jacket. Sorry, it's the numbers down here somewhere.
That's 68% of what you recovered.
Yes,
and you said you had significant targets for recycling, but how far have you got along the journey to your targets?
To our targets, we are this year. Sorry, I'm just going to find all the numbers. There's a lot of numbers. Last year, 85% of our source materials were recycled or more sustainably sourced. And out of those 85%, 25 was actually recycled materials in our garments.
And how strong do you regard your due diligence in undertaking sustainability? Because in the UK, we've just gone through a Competition and Markets Authority inquiry into sourcing, and the consequence of that is that two of the brands that I've mentioned who declined to turn up to this committee have been essentially instructed by the CMA to cease making claims about sourcing because they couldn't be verified.
We are operating in Germany and in Norway, who have due diligence legislation in place, which we abide by and report by today. So we have a strong due diligence process in our business due to the fact, again, that we are operating in markets that today have due diligence legislation. We are also supportive of the European Union legislation around due diligence as well, as we think it's an important part, going back to the transparency work, that is an important part of our sustainability work. Sorry.
You happen to know whether, and I should, but I don't know, whether H&M was one of the companies looked into by the CMA in the UK?
My understanding is we were not.
Right,
no, we were not.
It looks as though you weren't. That's been confirmed from behind. Okay. Is there a problem in other countries of sourcing that you benefit from, but you see other international competitors getting into difficulty with regulators over the claims they're making?
I think that, on a wider scene, we see that the due diligence legislation is an important part of pushing the industry in the right direction. We tend to think that we have we wanted to lead, and we have in some instances led the change. We have not, of course, we're not done by any means. We still have a long way to go, but we've been pushing it. And we're seeing that these kinds of legislations actually promote the whole industry change, and that's why we are supportive of it. We want to create a level playing field, no matter if you're bricks and mortar or if you're online or where are you based. So this is important legislation that we're seeing in these markets.
We heard in the previous panel about brands like Adidas and Nike, which got into difficulty, but it doesn't seem to have affected the performance of the brand particularly. Do you see this as a business risk to your brand in the event that it was found that your due diligence wasn't accurate?
I would say that it is absolutely a risk to operations if that was the case. However, when we look at our supply chain, and the countries where our suppliers are based, we do have production offices in these countries, and we're working on the ground to make sure that our due diligence is sound. We're working very close partnership with these suppliers, both to make sure that they have the right processes in place, but also in promoting workers' right, the right to sort of collective bargaining and similar. So we are working very closely on the ground as well. We're not sitting in our offices here in Europe, but we are on the ground in these countries.
Okay, thank you. Turn to Metcalfe. Could you just explain your business model and the impact that you have on the environment?
Yes, perfect. So thank you very much for having me. You mentioned in your introduction eBay, Vinted and Depop. So these are peer-to-peer platforms that help individuals to upload and to resell their garments. So Thrift Plus is a managed marketplace. So it's actually only about 25% of the population who are willing to take photos of their own items at the weekend. So we exist for everyone else, the other 75% of the population. So we handle every single item that gets onto our marketplace. We have an operation in Leicestershire with 65 brilliant team members who are taking the photos, physically taking the photos. And so we sit in the middle of the marketplace. Our intention, therefore, is to help get items back into circulation. We heard in the previous panel that is the best possible way of driving circularity, is maintaining items as high up in the hierarchy as possible and getting items out of the first owner's hands and into the second, third and fourth owner's hands. And so I am excited and hugely optimistic about the role that second-hand can play in competing directly on price, on choice, on speed with fast fashion and ultra-fast fashion.
Do you have a centralised model? An individual wishes to dispose of a garment, they send you a photograph, they then put it in the post, presumably, do they?
Exactly. Well, even less than that. So from our customer's perspective, from our seller's perspective, they receive a bag from us in the post. They fill it up with their second-hand clothes. We position it as a wardrobe clear-out service. You fill up the bag and then you send it back to us for free. So we're handling over 100,000 items a month. We then resell them on our own platform, but also are closely partnered with eBay, where we're the biggest seller of second-hand on eBay, and we're growing very, very rapidly.
What proportion of the goods you receive do you sell typically?
So we have a lot of data. We've now sold over 1 million items of second-hand clothing over the last 7 years. And so we have the data that allows us to make the decisions of what can we afford to put that labour. Every single item costs us money to handle it. So the answer is about 45% of what we receive is able to be resold, and that's typically for pure brand reasons. You know, our requirements are that it needs to be, in very general terms, Zara and above.
What happens to the 55% that you can't sell?
So we have partnerships with local charity shops, including Oxfam, whose shops come to collect from us on a daily or weekly basis, and then we work with a textile exporter called Ward, who then resells that product.
And it's not going into landfill?
It's not going. This product is not end of life, and I think we really need to recognise that products that are coming out of people's wardrobes are very rarely end of life. So these are brands which have life left in them, but we cannot afford to put the labour into them to resell them online. I happily speak at length about what we're, this phrase of textile waste and the idea of exporting textile waste. That phrase isn't particularly helpful, but we can get on to that.
We're going to come on to that, so I'm sure someone will want to ask you about that.
Lorna, just a point of clarity.
Yes.
Can you just clarify who gets to sell on Thrift?
So we are a consumer marketplace, so anyone can sign up to order a Thrift bag from our website and fill up the bag and send it back to us. Okay. Did that answer the question?
Is it similar to? It's different to eBay.
So eBay, you're having to take the photos yourself, whereas with ours, you don't do anything except put those items into a bag and send them back to us.
Who gets the money?
But you're selling on eBay, so that's where you derive your sales.
We sell on our own platform and then sync our entire. We have about 300,000 items live at any one time, which we sync across our own website, and we sync directly and automatically.
This is not an advertising platform for your business, so we're going to move on, but it's helpful to understand. how it works. Lorna, so Oxfam, we've heard, receives goods from other participants in the marketplace. Could you just give us a sense of the environmental impact at Oxfam's shops? Yours are all physical shops, I believe. Give us a sense of the scale of the textiles that you're handling every year and what proportion of those go to waste.
Absolutely. So charity retail still holds a unique role in this space, we believe. It diversifies the offer and comes, of course, with the added benefits of supporting social causes and funding charitable objectives, as well as supporting high streets and communities. In terms of charity retail's role, in Oxfam alone last year, we sold 6 million textile items. So that's 6 million items that we kept as high up the waste hierarchy as possible. We use a number of channels to do that, including 540 high street shops, superstore. We have our own Oxfam online shop, our own platform, and also festival shops, as well as pop-up events. So a really multi-channel approach which helps us to keep products in circulation for longer and extend the life cycle of product. We also have a recycling centre in the north, our northern recycling centre, so that enables us to sort and grade and ensure that we find the correct route for market for products that enables us to keep our product in circulation for longer.
Is that for resale, or is that to decide which is the appropriate waste stream for that to go into?
So both. So that enables us to choose which avenue, so whether an item will be sold in shops, online, or it could end up in one of our festival shops on a field in Glastonbury, for instance. So it enables us to be more specific, so to give it the best possible chance of resale. And
can you give us a sense of where Oxfam sits in the scale of charity shops? I mean, I think of you as one of the biggest, but I'm not sure whether you are.
We're one of the top 3 charity retailers.
Right. And 6 million items, what sort of market share does that give your sector? Is anybody able to? You may not be able to answer that. Does anybody know?
I don't have that statistic right now.
I guess one thing I'd add is that I think it's often overlooked the role that charity shops play in this sector. They are effectively a nation's worth of, I said 25% of us resell some of our items, but effectively a nation's worth of clothing is going into typically bin bags and being donated to charity shops or into large donation bins. And so it's kind of a distribution, 10,000 plus charity shops who are powered by 100,000 volunteers sorting through our old clothing. Actually, that works, well, very happy for extra comment, but that works due to those volunteers and due to significant tax breaks in the charity retail sector that allow that model to work, but doesn't work in the private sector.
That's very helpful. I'm just going to, before passing on to other colleagues, I know lots of people have got questions. Mr. Rini, boohoo undertook to review the supply chain when you last appeared before us 5 years ago. You made great play of the new manufacturing facility that was being established in Leicester, and subsequent to our hearing, closed down relationships with a number of domestic UK suppliers that were not meeting the standards that you'd set. Yeah. You've subsequently and recently decided to close the manufacturing facility in Leicester. Could you explain why that came about?
Definitely, Chair. Just maybe some context, if I may. So we first published our UK supply chain back in 2020. And obviously we had, and you're aware because we discussed it in several hearings, we had gone through the Alison Levitt report published in full, our Agenda for Change programme, KPMG governance and oversight. Sir Brian Levison published 5 independent reports. So we'd obviously been through quite a lot in terms of our supply chain. We first published, as I said, the UK supply chain in 2020. We currently refresh and update our publication worldwide every 4 months. 2/3 of the factories, the suppliers that were first published with us in 2020 are still published today and are still our UK suppliers. So what I would say is that the UK is still an important manufacturing hub to us. We would absolutely ask that other UK-based retailers not only attend sessions like this, but also consider UK manufacturing. The vision behind Thermiston was, at the time, very simply, we had gone through significant acquisition phase, so we had bought several British brands out of administration. Ironically, none of those British brands had a UK manufacturing footprint, so none of the products that those brands had sold had ever been made in the UK. So the vision for Thurmaston Lane effectively was to make what effectively were more complex garments in Thurmaston, in the factory. We still obviously had and still have relations currently with 41 suppliers in the UK, mainly in Leicester. So they're still manufacturing for our brands, but the vision quite simply was to manufacture more, what we would call more complex garments. Garments that would generally get made overseas. So woven dresses, buttoning, plackets, fusing, more complex areas. The truth is that that skill set, unfortunately, isn't in the UK. We tried for 2 years. We operated at 1.2 shifts, a 2-shift pattern. We spent a lot of time and effort and invested a lot in terms of trying to upskill the workers. But quite frankly, we found that we couldn't make those garments to the right workmanship standard within the UK. And that's why we made the very genuinely reluctant decision to close that facility down. It doesn't in any way diminish our commitment to UK manufacturing. As I said, we still deal with 41 suppliers. There are 41 active UK-based businesses that are manufacturing goods for boohoo today, boohoo brands today.
Thank you. That's helpful overview. We're going to come back to some of those issues in a minute. I just want Chris Grayling to have an opportunity. I know he's got to leave shortly.
Can I just ask Mr. Reed, you explained quite well the changes in customer purchasing behaviour in the last 5 years, the move towards the platform that you had created and the move towards resale. But to what sense do you have that customers are now buying new clothes because their old ones are no longer usable, or are they doing it because they want to follow new trends?
Interesting question. So, again, if I may, and you might say, of course, would say this, we don't like the term fast fashion. We use the term fast fashion in the context of monetising a trend. So our job, our buyer's job, is to commercialise a trend. So if a consumer wants something, get it in front of them quite quickly. That's the nature of online retail. It's test and repeat. It doesn't in any way, from our perspective, mean that the product that we sell don't have a long life and aren't durable. We are one of the brands that are involved in Textiles 2030 Durability Project with Leeds Institute of Textiles as an example. We have a product testing lab ourselves in our office. We do about 30 tests a day. So the principle from our perspective is that products need to be durable to have the life that ideally first consumer, second consumer, and ideally a third and fourth consumer want from them as well.
Okay. Mr. Hartmann, what's your view? Do you think the driver of customers is the replacement of worn-out goods or to follow fashions?
Well, I mean, as per usual, the answer is always in the grey zone on this, of course. I mean, I don't think there's one answer that's correct. I think it's a combination of both. People still want to express who they are through fashion. We see that very clearly. And that's why we see it as important for us to build our model on the 4 pillars of fashion: quality, affordability, and sustainability.
And with the development of reselling platforms, Ms. Fallon, Mr. Metcalfe, do you believe that these platforms are actually a threat to third sector retailers?
We feel that it's a double-edged sword. They can encourage people to purchase second-hand pre-loved clothing, maybe for the first time, so that can be a good thing in encouraging positive behaviours and making more sustainable choices. But for charity retailers specifically, it means there is more competition for quality stock, and charity shops are no exception. People are still looking for good quality at fair prices.
Mr. Metcalfe, what's your view?
I think there was a report published yesterday that 46% of our fashion is still just being thrown straight into the bin, into the general waste. Yeah. Where we operate, we actually see, I use a slightly flippant comment, that supply is unlimited. There's 100 billion items of clothing produced each year. Yeah. And actually innovation in the models that help get these items back into circulation is a good thing for circularity.
And do you think that the platforms offer a perverse incentive to overconsume? Because if you know you can pass it on, you buy something because you like the look of it, you wear it a few times, you can pass it on, you make some money from it, and away you go. And actually, therefore, you end up buying more than you would otherwise have done.
I think the most, firstly, no, but in an important way, consume. We need to understand whether consume in that context means production, and we need to find models and ways that we can decouple consumption from production of new goods. So this is actually a really well-trodden path for these peer-to-peer platforms. Both Vinted and Depop have done their own research here, and there's a phrase called the displacement rate, which is the likelihood of that item to have displaced purchasing a new good. Vinted's research shows that's about 40%. So 40% of the time, an item that's being purchased on Vinted is preventing the sale of a new good or the purchase of a new good. And with Depop, that grows to about 90% according to their research. So overconsumption would suggest a 0% or a negative displacement rate, which is just not what the data shows.
And then in terms of the approach you're all taking in different ways, different parts of the market and so forth, in marketing, in trying to influence the public, in trying to change behaviour in a way that's commercially beneficial, do you actually think that you are weakening the sustainability element of what is needed? You're actually trying to get people to buy more. And by definition, if you get people to buy more, you would expect the pipeline of products coming into the market to be bigger. And I think particularly many of the big retailers use celebrities, influencers to try and drive sales and to drive the attractiveness of new product ranges. Is this really consistent with sustainability?
Can I jump in on that one and say that we had a campaign last year with a lady called Kourtney Kardashian Barker, that she's got a massive worldwide following. The conversation was meant to be around sustainability and was designed to be around sustainability and the principles of sustainability. We didn't position ourselves as the champions or necessarily the retailer with all of the answers. It did provoke some very, very interesting feedback. And I think, and I can't speak for the panellists, but I would imagine exactly the same. Commercial prerogatives and sustainability prerogatives can and should obviously live hand in glove, because ultimately, genuinely, we all need to be sustainable businesses. Yeah. We do. If I may give one business, UK business, a plug, this is a soap dish. This was probably a top or a blouse or a pair of jeans at one point. There's a business in Nottingham called Upcycle Labs. Now, we happen to have a partnership with him, but we're not the only retailer that has a partnership with him. He's effectively taking your old unwanted clothes and he's converting it into, generally it's industrial bricks and tiles, but he also does ceramics. I'm happy to pass it around. Now, we're going to no doubt talk about EPR presumably, but that's what we need. And I think the first panel covered it as well. We need more scalable circular solutions so that we can be fully sustainable ourselves as a business. Our job, truthfully, is to sell to consumers, responsibly sell to consumers, but we believe we need more solutions like that.
From our perspective, I think that I fully agree on the concept that we can do both sort of marketing and remain sort of a sustainable. We try to have a lot of conversations with our customers around our circular customer-facing business models that we have. We try to educate them on how to take care of the garments to prolong the life, try to sort of inspire them to change it and use it for a longer time. We do have in some of our stores repair services that they can bring the clothes in to have them repaired or remade in different ways. We have in our store in Regent Street, just a stone throws away, we have a rental service where they can rent, instead of buying a gown dress, they can rent it. And also we have the sort of in-store resale area in Regent Street. So we're trying to also talk to them about these issues as well, because we know that going forward, we still want to grow as a business. We want to do it in a sustainable, and then the circular business models will be increasingly important.
Helpful. Let's go.
Thank you, Chris. John McNally.
Thank you very much, Chair. My questions are basically on consumer behaviour and voluntary industry initiatives. My first question is to Andrew and to Joe. Just wonder if you could tell the panel, how could you tell us about how the partnership between yourselves, Boohoo and Thrift Plus, the impact that it's having? What have you learned from each other, and what prompted this initiative in the first place? Whoever wants to go first.
Let Joe go first.
Yeah. So we're partnered with a couple of the boohoo brands. And we work with another 15 or so high street fashion brands, so the likes of Fat Face, White Stuff, White Company, Crew Clothing, Gymshark. Those partnerships, the brands are helping to promote our service, our fashion take-back service, to their consumers. So that's the way that it works. At checkout or in store, their customers, as they're checking out, are asked, would you like to add a Thrift Plus bag to your basket? They receive that with their e-commerce purchase, and it allows them to clear out their wardrobe and responsibly send those back to us. So I believe it's an imperative for brands to be doing everything they can to facilitate the circular economy. I believe that the circular economy already exists with charity shops, with Vinted, eBay, Depop, with Thrift Plus. And so I think recognizing that brands, just to the previous question, recognizing that brands are in a pretty difficult position when it comes to sustainability. Their job is to create a brand and, as Andrew said, sell to consumers, and typically, as we just heard, to grow. I believe they should be responsible for the inputs into the system and for doing everything they can, and I believe it should be an imperative and regulated and legislated that they are doing everything they can to facilitate the circular economy.
Okay.
Joe's model is a very important part of the circularity principle, if you like, that we're trying to help support. I'll give you another, perhaps maybe one or two more examples. Karen Millen is one of our brands, and they partner with another UK business called Higher Street. That business effectively has about 100 different brands on its platform, and effectively you can hire a Karen Millen dress or top for an occasion. On our most recent call with the team there, they were able to say that the latest set of dresses, Karen Millen dresses, that our team had made available to them, are booked out for the whole summer. The way the model works is that typically the rental price is 20% of the retail price. So say the retail price of a dress is £100, which is a significant amount of money, but it's for a consumer wants it for an occasion, for instance. So that the rental price is £20. That includes ozone cleaning as well, and obviously courier charges as well. So the idea is that a consumer can make not necessarily even a purchase if they want, but they can still utilise the goods. So that's one example. There are there's a proliferation of brands and different models in that space. Typically what the guys will say was that the garment in question has a life cycle of about 20 rentals, because obviously it's cleaned 20 times and then it goes onto their pre-loved platform for consumers to buy at a much, much more discounted price. That's one example. We also have repair options as well. The guys are talking about, Marcus spoke about them, and that's the principle from our perspective as a retailer. Consumers' habits are changing, and rental now is, you think of Spotify, Netflix, it's a subscription-based model effectively for clothing, and it works.
I visited the place at Euro Park Central. I think it's probably one of the biggest cleaners, everything they do, taking recycled clothes from kilts to dresses to everything. It was absolutely a phenomenal model to see how it was actually working in the flesh, and the people that were employing, and everything they were doing was green. So it's good to know that. But so how did you two did you lock heads to say we need to actually work together here? Or how did it happen?
We launched our first partnership in this way with Farfetch, an international luxury marketplace. And from there, we had brands interested in doing the same thing. So we've had brands contacting us to launch.
They contacted you in the first place. So that was a recognition that was going on that you were doing something right. That's a compliment to yourselves and your initiative in the first place. So my second question is basically about it's the Andrew, Joe and Lorna. So we'll go with Lorna first, if that's okay. What is your experience of being a Textiles 2030 signatory? What are you doing or saying that you wouldn't have known otherwise?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay, well, I'll talk slower. So, Lorna, what is your experience of being a Textiles 2030 signatory in the first place? What are you doing or seeing now that you didn't know before and that you wouldn't have done otherwise?
I think it helps in terms of building relationships with other members and being a driving force of sustainable change. So, for instance, one of the initiatives that is, I think we're in week 2 at the moment, so too early to deliver any insights, is our partnership with Marks and Spencer's. We have just launched a innovative trial where we will consumers can request 2 postal bags, one with wearable clothing, one with non-rewearable clothing, and this is part of our partnership with UK Innovate and which is led by the Fashion and Textile Association. So there's lots of people involved, a great example of collaboration. But it's the first test of testing a citizen pre-sort, so where we're asking people, members of the public, to sort into non-rewearables and rewearables. So no sort of data yet because it's only in week 2, but demand for the subscription, the bags, has been phenomenal. They were oversubscribed within days. So, yeah, we're really looking forward to that. But that's a great example of how being a member of Textile 2030 supports collaboration.
Andrew, could you comment?
Yeah, I'd agree with Lorna. I think if the industry as a whole is to move to a circular business model and reach our targets, collaboration and innovation are the two key fundamental principles. We set ourselves some stretching targets as well in terms of what we expect to do by 2030 in line with the Paris Accord. We have to get to a 52% reduction in our emissions, absolute, relative to our growth by 2030. That's broadly in line with RAP's commitments anyway. And then obviously we have to look to the next phase to get to net zero. So we need to do that together because obviously it's a key point. One of the points that was discussed in the context of the last session around Textiles 2030 was the results around carbon and water. And that was disappointing for all of us. And it's interesting, there was an interesting debate about cotton and polyester. And again, if I may, I think sometimes the perception is that natural fibres are good and synthetic fibres are automatically bad. And I think the cotton example is really good because we know cotton obviously is very water intense. One of the benefits, I suppose, of Textiles 2030 is collaborations around initiatives that we can do together. So, for instance, another opportunity, a UK business, Cotton Connect, we and several other retailers partner with them, and effectively through NGOs in different countries. We're just coming out of the 3rd year of our partnership with Cotton Connect in Pakistan to grow cotton. So we grow our own cotton in Pakistan through Cotton Connect. And we're in the 2nd year of a partnership in India with 2 other fashion retailers in the UK through Cotton Connect. Now the results have been quite startling, actually. Independently validated 18% reduction in water usage, almost a 40% reduction in chemicals and pesticides usage to grow the cotton in the first place, and actually really, really hearteningly, a 40% increase in the profit for the farmer, as well as biodiversity improvements. So I guess the point is that there are initiatives there, different retailers doing different things, but a lot of these initiatives get socialised through RAP and Textiles 2030, and I think that's the principle. We all have to move in the same direction together to come up with, hopefully, sustainable solutions.
Yeah, I think Professor Williams talked about different countries have different requirements for levels of water. There's one thing for sure, we've only got one planet and we're not making any more of it. Joe, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think I might strike a slightly different tone, and I may have to buy Keith a coffee afterwards. But I think what came out loud and clear from the last panel is that voluntary is not enough, and that we're going backwards on some measures. I have, and there is a real sense of frustration from those of us that are operating and powering the circular economy already, because we have a tilt towards action, and we want to do, and we want support in doing what we already do, and understanding the challenges of what we do, and allowing those models that already exist to accelerate. So that's my takeaway from the Textiles 2030 so far is that it is incredibly helpful at socialising these initiatives and identifying. But again, what I heard from the last session is we've published this. It's on our website, and we just need to turn it into action. And there's a real level of frustration there.
Yeah, before I ask my last question to yourself, but I think that's become quite evident from Joe Panisheshi, I think I can't quite pronounce his name, Nicol Bassett, Maud Hardy, they've all said that actually all of these initiatives are good, but fundamentally they need legislation to make these things work, or else they'll just fall away. And I think even from the APPG that we had yesterday on fast fashion, I think the CMA, I think that they would love to see something introduced that made it compulsory and mandatory for everybody to take up these initiatives, and thereby it would maybe start to halt all this waste that's going into everywhere. Everybody, at the end of the day, we're all responsible for it. So my last question is to you, Marcus. So being headquartered in Sweden, are there any lessons H&M would share about voluntary industry initiatives with us here today?
Yes, and I mean it's really clear that to achieve sort of lower emissions and lower impact for the fashion industry, cooperation and collaboration is definitely needed in different ways, and we do follow the work that's being done in the Textiles 2030. We're not members of that particular one. However, we are members of several other cooperations and collaborations that we work together with. For example, we are on the steering committee of the Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action under the United Nations. We're working in close partnership with the World Wildlife Foundation and their business network. We are a member of the Fashion Pact, which is a CEO-led initiative, which unites us to sort of have a sort of collective solutions in the fashion industry to tackle the climate change, biodiversity issues, and also protecting the oceans. I can go on and list a lot of these things, but we are clearly part of these collaborations, cooperations globally. We do realize that we have an impact, but having that impact, we can also be a part of the solution if we do this together.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, John. So, Christo.
Chairman, I think for me this has been a fascinating session, because what it has told me is that the United Kingdom is very lucky to have such a vibrant, new and used clothing sector, which is innovative, competitive and successful, and is delivering, as we've heard, low prices to consumers, far lower than the current rate of inflation. And so that has been achieved largely through the industry itself taking responsibility. So would you advise the government and Parliament to steer well clear of trying to introduce more mandatory regulation of what you do, which will create bureaucracy, additional cost and rigidities, and undermine the efforts which you've been making? And would you, Andrew, particularly, be able to comment on the costs for boohoo of recent regulatory initiatives, and whether that has helped your company or hindered it?
Well, we're AIM listed, so obviously a PLC, so we produce a sustainability report every year. We produced our first one in 2021, obviously not as mature businesses as Marcus, but on the journey. So we've produced our sustainability report, generally housed within our annual report. This year will be the second year of our TCFD report, which obviously looks at areas like risk and audit and governance generally. We're keeping a close eye obviously on the UK taxonomy code, which we believe will be published later this year. The previous panel spoke about the sustainability regulations disclosures, which effectively will put a focus on ensuring that the strategy that we have is valid. We believe that it will be broadly in line with the already in place EU legislation, the CSDDD. So there are a lot of acronyms in this space. We do think, and it is an interesting topic, when we talk to investors, for instance, and shareholders, the questions around our sustainability strategy always come up. And it's not necessarily just a strategy that says, right, these are our targets. It's show us the progress that you're making on the journey. So from our perspective, TCFD is already in place. The likelihood is that we'll probably build on that with the next set of regulations. And again, you know, it's understandable that whether it's government or whether it's NGOs, ultimately consumers, because we're all consumers. So we all have an interest, and we all have an obligation to ensure that the products we're buying, you know, are from retailers that we trust. So from our perspective, we're monitoring the space, and ultimately it'll be what it'll be.
Anybody else want to say anything?
Sorry, can I just come in here, please? From an Oxfam perspective, I mean, the UN Alliance for Sustainable Fashion states that consumers are buying 60% more clothing than they did 15 years ago. So the status quo is bringing with it a high cost to planet and to people. So the fashion industry has a responsibility to address this urgently. At Oxfam, we don't believe that voluntary will resolve this, and so we feel that there needs to be legislation to hold the fashion industry to account. And so we don't have a precise policy ask, but we do feel that there needs to be better regulation of the industry to bring it up to standard and ensure there's a level playing field. And we would ask that charity retailers are considered and are part of that solution.
From our perspective, we do welcome sound and good legislation. We want to create a level playing field for the industry. There are a lot of companies doing a lot of good, pushing the agenda on this, but we need that others join as well. And I fully agree with what you're saying, that voluntarily this probably won't happen. But we need this to be a level playing field and as harmonized as possible. We are a global company, and we operate, as I said, in almost 80 markets. So I think that's, and I do realize that it's maybe a utopian dream to find harmonized legislation in 79 markets, but let's see what we can do to come as close as possible to that. And we, as I said in the beginning, transparency and dialogue is a big part of our operations, and we are happy to continue this dialogue with any policymaker or government that has an interest in pushing sound and good legislation in this area.
I think there was an important phrase just then, which was level playing field. And actually, there isn't a necessity for this to feel like enormous bureaucracy. And I think there's a solution which helps support the brilliant companies that are producing clothing and the brilliant brands that we have here to produce them in a responsible way. And actually, intense downward price pressure is not the way to create a healthy fashion economy.
So, turning to the extended producer responsibility, and where you are in the well down the food chain on that, isn't that going to be unnecessarily burdensome for you?
So again, the brands. So I'm not an expert on EPR. I hope I can bring my expertise from what we do at Thrift Plus in reselling and handling and processing post-consumer clothing. Again, my opinion here is that brands should be doing everything they possibly can and should be mandated that they do everything they possibly can to facilitate the circular economy. That doesn't necessarily mean they have to create it. It doesn't necessarily mean launching second-hand marketplaces or launching rental services even. It means that they are, with the products that they are putting onto the market, they are made from recycled materials, they are designed to be recyclable, and then the product data, that's one of the really important things for us, that the product data of that item is available to those, whether they're consumers who want to resell, whether they're charities that want to resell, whether they're B2B resellers like us, in order to make it as effective as possible at getting that item back into circulation.
Andrew,
if I may, just again a stat to share with the committee, which we thought was quite interesting, and obviously it plays back to the conversation in the first panel around DPR. So last year, we sold approximately 4% of our unit volumes into France, into our customers in France dispatched from our UK DCs. Yet France as a country accounted for over 40% of all of the packaging and labelling taxes and charges that we paid as a business, a significant amount of money. So again, it just plays back to the narrative around the fact that some countries are definitely more advanced in the context of that. From our perspective, we would welcome an EPR. But the ask would be that the revenue is used to the conversations we've had earlier about scaling up circular solutions, a bit like the example we gave there, because ultimately that's the bit that we think needs the most investment, more investment there, more investment in R&D to come up with better solutions. The Salvation Army have an operation in the East Midlands. The panel discussed polyester in the first instance. They take polyester fibres and they break it down into pellets. Now, the tonnage is small relative to the size of polyester, if you say dumped
in the UK. It's called Project Reclaim. But the point is that there are initiatives there. Things are happening in the industry, but truthfully not enough. And that's potentially the opportunity through EPR.
And what about the costs? I mean, you've got experience of what the costs are in France. Are the costs of all their regulation putting up the consumer price in France or not?
It's something that has to be borne as a business, different. You know, it's just a practical reality for us as an online business. Marcus trades in 80 countries. We dispatch to over 60 countries. So it's something that we just have to bake into our business model. And ultimately, it's about sustainability and the circular model. Joe's point on data is very valid as well. You need to start with your data. An example: a kilogram of virgin polyester emits about 10 kgs of CO2. A kilogram of recycled polyester emits about 27% less, as an example. So as businesses, our obligation is to buy recycled products with recycled ingredients within them as a starting point. Over 98% of all of our emissions are our suppliers, freight, and our consumers. So there's a big piece of work to be done in terms of consumers and education, and back to the point around those scalable circular solutions, because that will ultimately get us to a place, hopefully, where we won't have the challenge that we have currently on waste.
Yeah, and you believe that the consumer can be king or should be king, provided there's sufficient information.
The consumer keeps us all in business, and as I said, we're all consumers. We all have choices to make.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Barry Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. If I can start off by asking Mr. Rini and Mr. Hartmann, how do your companies reduce microfiber shedding? It was something that was raised previously. We know that 20 to 35% of all the microplastics that are found in the oceans come from clothing and textiles. And other countries certainly have taken a fairly robust approach here. Last time, companies were asked to do further research. They were asked to work with washing machine manufacturers and so on. What steps have your companies taken to do that?
Again, a topic of conversation, I guess, for the first panel, and the challenge here is back to the earlier point about the perception that, say, natural fibres are good and synthetic fibres are bad. And we understand.
I understand that there are equal problems.
Exactly.
Right? But I want to focus on this because microplastics are a huge global problem. And it was something that specifically, I think, in the previous report of this committee and in the discussions that we had, certainly with your company, but with the industry as a whole, that we have touched on before. So it's important, I think, that we get a sense of what progress your companies have made since then.
Our company and lots of others are members of the Microfibre Consortium. So obviously the focus of the consortium is to understand exactly what the shedding looks like, and the degrees to which polyester sheds, and obviously, as you said, ultimately where it goes. From our perspective, certainly, Marcus may have better insights. There is no, at this point, industry solution to the challenge around polyester. As I said earlier, polyester is still a fibre that's used in most clothing, because generally speaking, not all the time, most clothes tend to be a blend of perhaps a natural fibre and a synthetic fibre. The irony is sometimes that the blend can extend the life and the durability of that product, as opposed to a single source fibre, for instance, a cotton only or, say, a wool only garment. So it's a challenging area. And
you'll be aware of the EU's eco design for sustainable products regulation, and that talks about binding design requirements that will aim to prevent and reduce microfibre shedding. How are you in compliance with that?
So there's things that we do in terms of, ideally where possible, single fibre, because obviously it's easier to break down. Sometimes the single fibre may still be polyester. The nature of some products, for instance, means that they are going to be synthetic. Your jacket, for instance, is going to, as an example. So there are some product types that by definition will be a synthetic. But the eco-design principle is exactly as you say, a single fibre, less trims and accessories wherever possible, and less overconsumption during the manufacture of the process.
But yes, You're telling me the what. What I'm asking you is to quantify the reduction, the way in which those eco-design principles have actually influenced your manufacturing process so that there is less of the offensive material designed in the first place. Has it done that, or actually has it not resulted in any significant reduction at the design phase in your own manufacturing process?
At this point, I can't truthfully say it's resulted in a significant reduction. It is something we're aware of. It is something, obviously, that we try as best we can to adhere to. But as I said, the nature of some product types means that they're going to be, in some instances, 100% synthetic, the nature of that product of itself. So I guess we are aware of it. We do our best genuinely to adhere to it. The issue of the plastics is something that, unfortunately, at this point doesn't have an industry-wide solution.
Perhaps, I'll come to you, Mr. Hartmann, in just a second. Perhaps either you or your successor could write to the committee with the details of exactly what steps you've taken to try and align the design process in the company with the eco-design sustainable products regulations.
I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hartmann, exactly the same questions.
Yeah, what I wanted to chip in and say is that, I mean, you are absolutely right that the eco-design requirements are a part of the European Union legislation now being discussed. To my understanding, and I might have to go back and check this is still something that's being worked on, the exact formulation of those, and because I know that I have colleagues, experts that are sitting on these working groups together with the European Union to sort of figure out how we can do that in the best way. Aside that, and some maybe one of the lowest hanging fruits in that instance is again going back to talking and communicating with our customers, educating them on how to take care of the garments, not only to prolong their life, but also to avoid these kinds of microfiber shedding, depending on how you wash them, how often you wash them, and stuff like that. So working.
I was going to come to that because, of course, in France they're introducing regulation, I think from next year, that all new washing machines will be fitted with a device to filter microfiber plastic out, or if not completely, at least partially. Is that a regulation that you think it would be sensible for us to introduce, burdensome though it might be, in the UK?
Representing the fashion industry, it would be presumptuous for me to sort of discuss legislation that would affect the electrical industry, but it sounds like a good idea from what you're saying.
Mr. Rini?
Yes, I would agree.
Thank you. Can I ask the both of you, what proportion of your stock goes either to landfill or incineration, and would you welcome a landfill or incineration ban on stock that could be reused?
There's two parties, and you talk about our stock firstly, and for our stock, we work very hard to make sure it gets sold. That's the first step. No, but of course it's in the stores at first, but then we also work hard for the things that we can't sell in store to make sure that it is actually sold and then sort of used as clothing. When it comes to whatever might be left, and all those options are sort of, we run out of all those options, we do not send it to landfill. We could donate it to charity, or we can find other ways to get rid of it, but we do not send to landfill.
What about incineration?
Incineration, not when it comes to new goods. When it comes to the garment collected goods that we have in our store, there are about 8% of what we collect that goes to incineration as energy recovery. And that could be for reasons that they are either hazardous or cannot be used for anything else.
So these are articles of clothing that have been sold, but customers have then, at the end of their life, or when perhaps just when they're tired of them, they've returned to your store for recycling.
But if it's goods that are not sold, at the end of that is that we donate it to someone.
Do you give us an estimate of the percentage of your stock that happens to?
I do not have that number readily available. And the reason for that could be that it's a competition discussion that we might have. But I'll see what I can do and then send it afterwards.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Again, the same question, Mr. Reid.
From our perspective, again, we've made a commitment that we will have no UK waste to landfill by 2025, and we've made very good progress in that space. Our
I'm sorry, I don't mean to see a loophole where there is none, but you said of our UK.
Yes. I'm going to
Does
talk
that
UK
mean
first.
That it goes
No, I'm going to
okay.
talk UK first if you
Fine.
let me.
You get my drift.
So the reason I focused on the UK in the first instance is that it is quite complex, and I wanted to illustrate the challenge. So in our world, as I said already, we have a significant UK manufacturing footprint. So a commitment to say no waste to landfill has to include upstream as well, our suppliers. So in that instance, similar to Marcus, and if you take, say, on average, the fabric that's used to cut a garment into cut to make a garment, about 6-7% of the fabric offcuts are not usable. So we have a partnership in place effectively, which means that those fabric offcuts do get incinerated for waste. So that's one area within the UK, and I'll speak internationally in a second. Again, like Marcus, we don't obviously have any physical stores, so we don't have take-back schemes, but we have the resale platforms I've referenced. We've obviously got partnerships like the one with Joe and Higher Street, and we have a charity partnership very similar to Lorna's Oxfam with British Heart Foundation. So from our perspective, we have the loop not quite completely closed, but we're working to move in that direction.
Right, so just so I'm clear, unsold stock, so unsold clothes that you can't sell, similar to Mr. Hartmann, you would have a scheme where those were donated to charity.
Charity, if they're sellable. If they're not sellable, they end up as soap trays and candlestick holders. So that's the other route. So if, again, the principle being no waste to landfill.
These are new clothes.
No, if they're not new clothes, if they're damaged clothes. So the nature of the online model, unfortunately, means sometimes customers will buy something from us and they may decide that they will wear it and return it, and it could well be damaged. And something that is irrecoverable, unwearable, may end up as
a soap dish.
Exactly,
okay.
as a soap dish.
Thank you. And let's revisit the issue about going to landfill in the UK. Does it mean that there may be stock that's going to landfill outside of the UK?
At this point, our commitment is to the UK. We obviously have declarations from all of our suppliers to say that they don't themselves put any waste into landfill. Our first target is UK by 2025, and then obviously we'll move to international. The truth is that, again, we manufacture in 20 plus countries. We have 800 suppliers, 90% of which are shared across the high street, but that's truthfully a more complex and bigger geography, if you like, and that's our next step, next target.
Okay, so at the moment you can't give that commitment for the rest of your supply chain?
I couldn't give an absolute commitment.
Thank you. Tell me what changes you've made in the past 5 years to your sourcing of materials, and changes that you've made to your design principles. We touched on design principles a little earlier, but it was very specifically with reference to microfibers. So if we can widen that out.
The same principles would apply. So ideally, single fibre, less trims, extras, if you like, associated with the product, and the least amount of consumption within the critical path. What do I mean by that? We don't need extra samples, if you like. One sample will do, one production sample will do. So they're the simple principles, if you like, in the context of the eco-design, if you wanted to call it that. In simple terms, the biggest move we've made, and similar to Marcus, is buying more products with sustainable ingredients contained within them. That's the biggest change, obviously, we've made, and that's the biggest advance, because ultimately that's a big part of the reduction in our emissions.
So in terms of sourcing more sustainable materials, quantify that, if you will. Explain to me what the switch has meant for you.
So take cotton as a starting point. As I said, you can buy standard cotton, or we grow our own cotton in Pakistan and India, so we obviously use that as an example. There's another program called BCI Cotton, Better Cotton. We use that as a program. We sometimes use organic cotton as examples. So there are within, say, cotton as an example, there are multiple different types of cotton that have more sustainable characteristics. Polyester is another fibre we use a lot of, and obviously we strive to use as much recycled polyester as we possibly can. And that's generally post-consumer.
Okay. It would be helpful, I think, if you could write to us and begin to quantify those changes. So what percentage was recycled polyester previously? Now, 5 years on, what percentage is it now? Again,
so.
if you could do that. So. Mr. Hartmann?
Yes, and again, overall sort of progression when it comes to sustainably sourced or recycled material, as I said before, is 85% of all material that we use are either recycled or sustainably sourced, and of that is 25% that is recycled. So when it comes to cotton, and that's, the biggest part of the material that we source, we have 100% recycled, organic, or sustainably sourced cotton in our garments. Breaks down into 13% organic cotton in 2023. It was 14% in 2022, so it's 1% decrease. We have 11% recycled in 2023, same as 2022. And the others, sustainably sourced cotton, as mentioned before, is from better cotton, which is 76%. This and it's up from 75% in 2022. So we're working, as we've come so far, it's like small changes now, but we are sort of working hard with that. When it comes to synthetics, it's of course polyester is the biggest one of the synthetics. We have a goal of 100% recycled polyester in 2025, so next year. In 2023, 79% was from recycled. Of course, now that is mainly from PET bottles, which of course is not the most sustainable choice, but still it is recycled. Earlier this year, however, we announced a joint venture together with a capital investment firm called Syre, which is the Swedish word for oxygen, which is a tech startup which is looking into textile-to-textile polyester recycling on a large scale. They are now in sort of working to set up their first research and development centers in the US. So we are working very, very hard when it comes to materials, because again, going back to where I started, this is where we have a huge impact when it comes to emissions and footprint.
That really is the philosopher's stone, if you can do textile-to-textile recycling.
That is the philosopher's stone, yes.
Absolutely. Thank you. Mr. Rini, I want to give you the opportunity to address the Competition Markets Authority investigation into boohoo for greenwashing, despite the fact that you're a signatory to Textiles 2030 and have a sustainable strategy. So how did that come about, and what material changes have you made subsequent to that?
We were pleased to have supported the investigation. As you know, we were one of 3 retailers, and the investigation...
Well, I didn't mean to let the others off the hook.
No. Look, ultimately, from our perspective, we believe this would build on the Green Claims Code. There's a series of very clear undertakings in place that obviously we've signed up to. And in very simple terms, there's three elements. A supplier certification process to confirm that the goods we're buying, do have those more sustainable ingredients. Mandatory reporting, so we're currently in our first reporting cycle, and then the third bit obviously is very clear guidance in terms of what can and cannot be said to the consumer. At this point, from our perspective, we literally list the ingredients within the product. So if something has recycled polyester, we call it out as recycled polyester, and effectively that's where we are. There's also very clear guidance in terms of marketing as well, and what can and can't be said to consumers. We actually think it's a good thing from an industry perspective, and as I said, we believe it'll build on the Green Claims Code.
Okay, and just to reinforce the Chair's comments at the beginning, I think it is a shame that ASOS and ASDA, who were the other 2 companies that were involved in that CMA investigation, have declined to come before the committee. Mr. Hartmann, we received evidence that the investigation by the CMA into those 3 companies led to something called green hushing amongst other retailers. Has that been your observation, or has it even been your practice?
You can always put labels on certain things, and sort of in the more popular sense. However, I would say that there is I mean, we need to be able to communicate with our customers and have a dialogue with our customers around sustainability in a good way, for them to make the choices not only based on fashion, price, and quality, but also taking sustainability into account. And for them to do that, they need to know how we work and why we do it and how we operate. So
in terms of your market spend, what proportion of your market spend is now being spent on marketing your products because of their sustainability? How are you changing your marketing practice to actually engage with your customers in that way and educate them, as well as explaining to them that these are values that you share with them?
I mean, we and it depends on how you define marketing. If you by marketing means what we do on the billboards and on advertising, I would say a very little part of that is around sustainability, unfortunately. However, we do communicate with our customers in other ways, in store, as their members, in newsletters, online, on our websites, trying to sort of, again, this is part of the Take Care initiative that we have on all our global websites, to inform and educate them on how to take care of the garments, to make them have a longer life. So, but with that said, I don't want to call it green hushing, because that's a buzzword right now. However, I think that we need to make sure that legislation, and we are, again, I'm repeating myself, but we are strong advocates of sound and good legislation around this area.
I take at face value the word that you used, which was, in terms of our billboard spend and so on, there isn't much about sustainability. You then said, unfortunately.
Yep.
Well, what I would say is, I agree, it is unfortunate. I think if we are going to educate the public, then using billboards, using that as a marketing strategy, other companies do use sustainability as a marketing strategy, and it's something that lies within your hands, and would urge you therefore to do it. Mr. Rini, in terms of your marketing strategy and the way in which you are seeking to engage with your customers around sustainability issues.
One of the points that the CMA made very, very clear through the investigation, to their credit, was that they didn't want the investigation to diminish in any way any retailer's ambition in terms of buying products that are more sustainable, and to their credit. And I guess what they've tried to do obviously is give us a very, very clear code. And right now, that's exactly what we're following. So all we're doing at this point is transmitting the ingredients, the sustainable ingredients at the product level. We obviously have our sustainability report and our annual report where we obviously talk about our strategy, but we don't conflate the two, and that's where we are today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry. Claudia Webb.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to just clear up one thing, actually, with Mr. Rini, with Andrew Rini. Just earlier, you gave an explanation about what Thurmaston Lane store or factory did, and I just declare an interest because I'm the Member of Parliament for that particular location. I just wanted to turn you to your own sustainability report of 2022, which actually set out what the Thurmaston Lane store was for, and it said quite clearly that in Leicester we've opened Thurmaston Lane, our manufacturing centre of excellence. Thurmaston Lane offers end-to-end garment production and will set the standard for UK manufacturing. Thurmaston Lane came out of the so-called boohoo scandal, and which was coined by the media, but and obviously your response in terms of the Alison Levitt QC review. But Thurmaston Lane was set to give the UK standard, and it goes further to indicate how many people you would employ, which says the facility will be used for supplier learning and development. This is UK supplier learning and development. The site is creating 170 jobs for on-site workers, part of our extended boohoo family. In other words, it was going to become that centre of excellence to show what a garment factory should look like, what it should be doing, and it came out of the so-called boohoo scandal. But you presented something different. I'm trying to understand the two presentations.
Let me maybe shine some more, if I can, on this. So it's factually accurate to say that the land in question was purchased before the so-called media-named boohoo scandal. So the plan had always been to potentially set up a factory in Leicester. I think the truth is, as I said, is we operated that factory for 2 years. And at its height, we did have not quite 170 colleagues. We were very close to 170 colleagues. I think at one point we had 167 colleagues. Over the course of the 2 years, approximately half of those colleagues were redeployed to our distribution centres. As obviously we started to, we went from 2 shifts to 1 shift. But like I tried to explain, what we found was that we didn't meet the manufacturing standards that we would have liked within that facility, and therefore we made the reluctant decision to close it down. I think ultimately where we got ourselves to is that we are a retailer, we're not a manufacturer.
But how did the impact of the BBC Panorama expose have on the decisions around Thurmaston Lane? Because that said that your workers at Thurmaston Lane were making garments that essentially were about changing labels to made in Britain.
We absolutely do not believe the Panorama programme was a fair reflection of us as a business. And again, it's factually accurate to say that, unfortunately, we had already started the consultancy process before the Panorama programme. So we had already made the decision, and we were obviously going through the legal consultation process with our employees at that time.
So the garment workers transitioned to your distribution centre?
The point I made was that over the period of time within which we had the centre operated, some of the garment workers were offered alternate employment options, and approximately half, I get the exact number for the committee and perhaps I can share it afterwards if that's okay, took employment in some of our distribution centres in the UK. I would like to point out, I would like to point out, if I may, one of the points that we're very, very strong on is that we are one of the few large UK retailers that does manufacture in the UK, and we're proud of that. The vision of Thurmaston Lane, unfortunately, didn't come through. Businesses have to make challenging decisions all the time, and that was the decision we made.
Well, I ask you that because it was one of the highlights that came out of your Alison Levitt review in terms of the implementation of the recommendations. You'd said, Boohoo'd said, that it has set up a state-of-the-art factory to show what garment manufacturing in the UK could look like. And it was a state-of-the-art building in that respect. So I just wanted, and that just really takes me to the questions around. The last time Boohoo came to our committee, it was in the middle of that Agenda for Change programme, that which came out of your Alison Levitt QC review, implementation of the recommendations. Could you just tell us give us an update of that programme and how it was concluded?
Of course, just on a point, and I'll clarify this exactly with the committee afterwards, but I'm pretty sure that we didn't make any reference to Thurmaston Lane as part of the Alison Levitt report. But I'm going to clarify that afterwards from the committee's perspective.
It was part of all of your promotion and publicity. I mean, I said I declared this as a Leicester MP, and obviously it was about demonstrating this is what good work looks like in Leicester, good work for garment workers, only for my constituents to tell me that they were indeed changing labels to made in Britain. That's what they were telling me they were doing for 6 months in that factory. So could you just tell me what's in terms of the Agenda for Change How did it conclude? What were the outcomes?
So again, I'm happy to share the commentary that we've already shared, but in very simply, as we said already, we published the Alison Levitt report in full. The Alison Levitt report showed some very, very clear failings, some very clear process failings, some very clear structure failings, and as I said, the report was published in full. We commissioned what we called our Agenda for Change programme, which was an internal programme, but it had KPMG oversight and governance, just to ensure obviously the programme was carried the right way. And then, as we said, Sir Brian Levison did 5 independent reports on the progress, effectively charting the progress. All were published in full. And the PLC board, in its entirety, signed off on the Agenda for Change in February 2022.
So what does that mean in terms of, because obviously the Alison Levitt review was about the working practices in your supply chain. So give us some flavour of how that improved.
Well, what I would say is that, notwithstanding the fact that the Agenda for Change programme was signed off on in February 2022, we obviously still have, and we've built a very strong compliance function. If I can share some figures with you, last year 688 third-party audits, 878 semi-announced and unannounced audits by our own team. All of our we update our publication of our Tier 1 once every 4 months. We actually publish our ratings, our audit ratings of all of our sites as examples. We have a team on the ground in Leicester. I'm sure your constituents will be aware of that, notwithstanding the fact that Thermostat End is no longer operational. Our team are on the ground in Leicester a lot. We speak, certainly we share as much information as is relevant with the local authorities, national minimum wage, gangmasters. We go back to the conversations we've had previously about a single enforcement agency. We've said from the start that we would absolutely support the introduction of a single enforcement agency, because that's what we believe Leicester needs. And again, if I may, one other point to make, all of the narrative around Leicester and the challenges in Leicester, unfortunately from our perspective, means practically, from what we see, less and less other businesses willing to potentially manufacture in Leicester. And that's a lost opportunity economically from our perspective. So we believe single enforcement agency is really, really important, and us as a responsible retailer and business needs to make sure that we do everything openly and transparently, and that's one of the reasons we're here today.
Can I just ask, how confident are you that your supply chains are able to pay workers properly? You say you've got 41 suppliers left in Leicester.
In the UK.
In the UK. How many in Leicester?
I think it's 30s.
30s. And
I don't have the exact number. I'll get you the exact number afterwards.
41 in UK, 800 globally.
Yes.
So, just in terms of Leicester then, how confident are you, well, actually, why restrict it to Leicester? How confident are you that your supply chains are able to pay workers properly and that their rights are protected? That, for example, they do not end up with contracts that say their holiday pay will be paid after 12 months service, that there is a clause in their contract that says that their hours can be reduced to 10 hours a week should the work reduce, even if they've been working more than 5 years or more. That, for example, their wages are not delayed because there is a delay in payment in the supply chain with the brand, with yourselves. And that workers are not forced to work longer because they're seeking to meet your deadlines.
What you've listed there are effectively evidences of modern slavery. And what I would say categorically is that no responsible retailer would tolerate modern slavery, nor us from that perspective. If you have any specifics related to boohoo suppliers or suppliers that manufacture boohoo goods,
I'm saying quite clearly, these are what your employment contracts are for your supply chains. These are what the employment contracts say. So these are the current, apparently legally compliant employment contracts which pass through your supply chain. that workers can be told that they must stay and work to meet your deadlines, that workers in this contract says that they will get holiday pay, but that holiday pay will be paid after the first 12 months of service. These are the current employment contracts in the supply chain. So I'm just conscious how you're able to drill down to all of this level of detail with all of the compliance you say you have on the ground. Because your Thurmaston Lane showroom or factory, state-of-the-art, said in your sustainability report 2022 that it is also the home for your compliance team. So, you know, all of your compliance team was there in Leicester at the state-of-the-art factory.
I think there's a couple of things in there that I need to address. I think I don't recognise the examples that you give, and I would be really grateful if you could share those with me separately. You'll be aware of the fast-forward audit protocol and methodology. So that goes above standard audit methodology. So the principle is that all of our factories are fast-forward audited as a starting point. And as I said already, our team on the ground, notwithstanding the fact that Thurmaston Lane is closed, go in literally daily. And you'll also be aware, Highfields, Sharma, as examples, our team meet workers in those community centres as well. So our team are very active on the ground, unseen. Our worker helpline is in place as well. So as far as we're concerned, we have very strong mechanisms in place to make sure that what you're talking about doesn't happen. If you do have specific examples, please, I'd be very happy for you to share them with me.
Can I just move... Thank you. Can I just move on and just ask Marcus, if I can, just ask you questions? Obviously, Boohoo has had various sort of exposures over the years. It's been, these are all public knowledge in terms of the media focus, if you like, if not the issues that have been around for some time. I mean, it's Leicester's described as an open secret for workers' exploitation for a good number of years now. Hence the scandal, hence the Alison Levitt review, hence Boohoo's own implementations of its own recommendations. But it's not a problem that's only set to Boohoo. It is an industry-wide problem. What is HMN's approach to ensuring appropriate wages and working conditions throughout its value chains, supply chains, and what good practice have you witnessed in the industry?
Yes, thank you for the question. And to start with, I mean, it was to state maybe the obvious, but we are committed to respecting and safeguarding human rights across our entire value chain as led by the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. This is an absolute. And our standpoint around this is detailed in our human rights policy and strategies focused on the salient human rights issues. And as any company that are operating here in the UK, we do every year publish our modern slavery report around those parts. When it comes more sort of related to the workers in the supply chain, we engage with partners across the world. We have a global framework agreement with trade unions INretail and IF Metall, which is a Swedish trade union. And that sort of facilitates the social dialogue in our supply chain and promotes the workplace rights. We have national monitoring committees managing this agreement. We are also part of the Action Collaboration Transformation Agreement between INretail and global brands, which aims to deliver living wages through responsible purchasing practices and collective bargaining at the industry level. So we are members of all these things. Also, we are a board member of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, which recently changed names, and I lost it, but Sustainable Apparel Coalition. And then in that, we're committed to increasing and harmonizing data collection in the factories and sort of collating that input from multiple stakeholders. So we are working closely on that level. Also, as I said before, we have production offices in 15 of the countries where our main suppliers are, working closely with them in those markets to make sure that they, having signed our sustainability commitments and our policies, that they also abide by them in the best possible way.
It'd be fair to say that Bangladesh is one of your biggest garment buyers. Why are workers upset with H&M in Bangladesh?
Do you have any concrete examples of what?
There were you've been engaged. H&M have been engaged in a number of strikes. There have been workers' strikes in Bangladesh over the failure to pay the minimum wage, as set by the Bangladesh government. Workers complain about being paid way below that demanded by workers themselves, not as a living wage, but as a bare minimum wage. That it was only after a new poverty wage, not even the minimum wage, but a new poverty wage was announced that H&M confirmed that they would be willing to pay the increased price they pay suppliers to cover this.
Yes, I mean, again, one of the reasons that we are working together on these levels with the global trade unions and other sort of corporations are these exact instances to see that we need to improve this in the supply chain. And you're absolutely right, Bangladesh is one of the countries where we supply from, and where we also have offices.
This is your biggest supplier?
It is probably the biggest supplier, yes. So,
how many suppliers do you have in the UK?
To my knowledge, we do not have any suppliers in the UK, but we do.
Suppliers in the UK?
Not to my knowledge, no. We source mainly from other production countries, some that are near, but also in these countries. So
who is able to hold you to account? What body? If you haven't got any suppliers in the UK, in terms of fair wage, minimum wage, livable wage, these are all the things we talk about in the UK.
And that's again why we on a global level have the sort of global framework agreement with INretail, which is a global union, and also we're part of the ACT, which is a cooperation to have these issues and to discuss these issues. And we just signed a prolongation of 3 years on that. So we are working on that level with these different bodies.
There's also, I understand, and you may be able to just confirm this or not, but workers in Bangladesh who've been protesting and on strike have H&M, I'm told, have filed cases with the police against its own workers or workers in its supply chain.
That H&M has?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
We do not. We do. I mean, we supply from companies. We do not have our own factories in that sense.
That is part of the problem, isn't it? That the brands and the retailers can say that the workers are not our employees and not our responsibility. That is the problem.
Yes, and that is the reason.
That is the heart of the problem with brands and retailers in the UK or from the UK when it comes to workers. You can say it's down to your supply chains in terms of how they're paid and the conditions that they operate under.
And that is the reason that we have this agreement with the global union INretail and others to not shy away from that responsibility, but rather to work with it together with other players and with the unions and to make sure that we do the utmost to come to terms with this.
Can I just check, Andrew?
Question.
Well, I've got just a couple more. Can I just check, Andrew, just a very quick one. Does boohoo yet recognise a union?
We don't. We effectively allow our employees to join a union if they so wish. Effectively.
And are you aware of your supply chains having union representation?
Within our supply chain, freedom of association is one of the key principles within our code of conduct. So, of course, if workers within our supply chain want to join a union, that's we respect that right. In fact, actually, you'll probably be aware, we encouraged some of the suppliers that manufacture boohoo goods in Leicester to meet with the unions last year and the year before to see if union representation was something that was relevant to some of the workers in Leicester. So we have no issue from that perspective.
Can I just ask Thrift? Workers are telling me in Leicester that they are now making garments for suppliers in conditions which are worse and with pay which is worse. They've entered an underground process. I can't put it any better than that, because of course garment brands, as we've just heard, have left Leicester. Misguided are now Shein, having collapsed. Boohoo are now reduced to just 30 suppliers in Leicester. Workers are still working, but in an underground way. And they tell me that they're working for people that are making garments to sell on places like Thrift and eBay. How do you check all of this?
So we don't produce any goods. Our team is in Leicester. It's in Market Harbour, just on the Northamptonshire border. We are a real living wage. We pay the real living wage for our team of about 65 team members in our warehouse. I think it comes back to the point I made earlier, which is that intense price pressure in this market is not healthy for anyone. In particular, it's not healthy for those that are making our clothes. In terms of the wages that we pay here in the UK, I can't comment from the manufacturer of goods. On our marketplace, we only sell goods that are coming from people's wardrobes, so post-consumer clothing. So I can't comment on people who are manufacturing goods, but I can say from my point of view that, and from those textile exporters that I speak to in the similar area, that it is hard to be competitive in the UK because of the costs. And so from my point of view, in the post-consumer side of things, that actually there needs to be support in order to make these models work more effectively. I've spoken to 2 major textile exporters, which, by the way, typically call themselves recyclers, but are by default textile exporters, because we can't afford to sort our own second-hand clothing, except for the charity shop model. And so with our business model, there was a question of kind of who gets the money when items sell. Well, our fees are really, really high. We take a high percentage of the fee, of the sale value, because it costs a lot of money to ask someone in Market Harbour to take photos of your clothes for you. An interesting point I was hoping to bring up is just on the financial incentives there. We have VAT on new goods, effectively a consumption tax, but I'm also being charged VAT on the fees that we are charging to our sellers. And actually a really important way that the government or the legislation or taxation could be changed here is to recognise what is consumption and what is not. So from our point of view, those services which are helping to get items back into circulation, that are powering the circular economy, that aren't linked to consumption, should be supported by the government. I think VAT rates could be an important way of doing that.
That's an interesting idea. Claudia, I'm afraid I'm going to have to bring this to an end.
Say anything more.
Well, you've had more than twice the amount of time that anybody else has had.
I was just going to say
you've done very well.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just going to finish with a final question to Mr. Rini in relation to some of what Claudia was saying. The BBC allegation about the Thurmaston Lane site being used for mislabelling products made overseas being turned into made in the UK labels. At the time, I believe the company described this as an isolated incident arising from human error. Could you elaborate on that? It sounds a convenient excuse if this was a widespread practice. Could you characterise what actually happened and what investigation you did into it?
Yeah, it wasn't a convenient excuse. It was less than 1% of our intake volume, but it did happen. And we acknowledge that it did happen, and it was genuinely human error. We don't look to misrepresent the country of origin of our goods. we've, as I said all along, we do manufacture a sizable percentage of our goods in the UK, but like Marcus, we manufacture in other countries as well. It was less than 1% of the intake value of our goods. So obviously we've had some challenging conversations internally, and we've ensured that that process doesn't happen again. But it was an error.
Was this something that was looked into by the CMA, or was that they were looking more at the claims about the veracity of the supply chain and sustainability?
Exactly, that was their focus.
And has boohoo been required or requested by the CMA to change your claims about sustainability in the same way as Asda and ASOS were, or were you not asked to do that?
We've signed a set of undertakings that are unique to our business model. Obviously, each of the three business models were similar but slightly different. So the set of undertakings that we've signed are unique to us, as we understand. There is some overlap, of course, with the other two business models, and our focus is obviously adhering on that. As I said, I think I explained it earlier, we're in our first reporting cycle now, so we will report to the CMA soon.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for joining us this afternoon. I'd like to thank Andrew Reaney from boohoo. Enjoy where you go to next. Marcus Hartmann, particularly, for coming to join us from Sweden. Lorna, Fallon from Oxfam, and Joe Metcalfe from Thrift. Plus, order. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.